My name is Kevin, and this whole mess started a few months before quarantine last year. I was in 8th grade and my sister Jessica was in 7th grade. This particular day, as we got off the bus to go home, we noticed this white busted van just sitting near the edge of the road. This was odd as we hadn't ever seen the vehicle before. Inside was an older man, just minding his business, or so I thought. We barely noticed him at first, but not long after seeing the van, I felt like something was wrong. It was as if someone was watching us. I noticed Jessica's gaze shift to the vehicle, and I followed. The man was staring at Jessica. He had this crazy look in his eyes, then proceeded to lick his lips in a really odd manner. The stranger got out of his van and started limping towards us. He reminded me of a zombie the way he dragged his leg, his torn and dirty clothes, the slight moan that emerged from his throat. That freaked us out, so we decided to sprint home. As soon as we got inside, we locked the door. We looked at each other and thought the same thing. What in the world was he doing? I decided to get my mind off of him, thinking he was just some crazy old man. I eventually forgot about the strange dirty man. But when we returned from school the next day, the creepy van was still there, and so was the stranger. He was staring at us, and he did the same thing, licking his lips in the oddest manner. We ran home, and I closed the door and checked all the locks again. Jessica and I both agreed to not tell our parents, because we didn't want them to worry sick, knowing the kind of paranoid people they are. This kept going on for about a week, him being there and us getting scared and running home whenever we passed his van. But then it just stopped. He wasn't there anymore. We both felt relieved. As we got home, Jessica and I immediately logged into The Walking Dead Survivors again. After an hour, we both heard a knock on our door. This was unusual, as we didn't get visitors that often. Startled, I went to check who it was. I peeked out the window next to the door. It was this tall guy, about 6'3", wearing a black hoodie pulled high to also cover his face. In his hands was a pizza box. A pizza box? Who wouldn't want free pizza? I thought to myself. I looked over to Jessica, who also noticed him. She shook her head no. "Don't you want free pizza?" I asked. "We don't even know who that is, or what's in the box. Please don't open the door," said Jessica. She made a good point. The delivery guy knocked again, much harder this time. "Can you open up?" he asked. "We didn't order any pizza," I responded. He didn't say anything for a moment. "It's from your parents," the man said. "They wanted to surprise you, so can you open the door?" I looked at Jessica. She was pale, her eyes narrow. "He's lying," she whispered. "Mom and Dad would have told us if they were sending pizza. They wouldn't want us to open the door for a stranger." The delivery guy knocked again, so hard this time that the door shook. "Stop playing around," he growled. "Open, now." I didn't say anything this time, but I did lock the deadbolt. The man must have heard because he began pounding on the door. After a few moments, he stepped back. I glanced out of the peephole, just in time to see him take off his hood, revealing his face. "Oh no," I muttered. It was the same guy that was stalking us after school for the past week. He noticed me staring and licked his lips in that horrifying manner. I looked at Jessica. She had the same terrified expression as me. "Call the police and hide in the upstairs bathroom," I screamed. She ran upstairs as I went to check if the back door was locked. After I confirmed that the entire house was secure, I went upstairs and hid in the bathroom with Jessica. I found her shaking and crying in the bathtub. I told her everything was okay, even though I knew we were in danger. Just as I was finally calming her down, we heard glass shatter. He was inside the house. We stayed there, not daring to move a muscle. I could hear his heavy, dragging footsteps around the house. "Kevin, Jessica, I know you guys are here. Please don't make this hard for me." His groaning voice echoed around the house, filling every corner. The stranger was starting to make his way up the stairs. Jessica began hyperventilating. I got in the tub and covered her mouth so her breathing wouldn't give our location away. The old man was yelling, laughing like a maniac just on the other side of the door. Jessica's eyes were white with panic. "Don't worry, we're okay," I whispered to her. "Just pretend that we're survivors, like in the game." The zombies can't find the survivors if they're quiet. Jessica still looked terrified, but she nodded and stopped shaking quite so bad. You guys are trapped. You're all mine, the old man moaned. My clothes were drenched in sweat. The stranger approached the bathroom. He was standing in the hall, laughing. Then, suddenly, he became silent. It was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop in the distance. The old man was scraping the other side of the door with something metal. After a few seconds of scratching, he hit the wood hard enough to cause the frame to shake. I peeked over the edge of the tub. The point of a knife was pressing through the door. We were doomed. This was going to be the end. I was processing our last moments. The man slammed into the door again and again, causing the wood to crack. Jessica screamed. A final blow buckled the door and snapped the lock. The old man stood in the doorway and licked his cracked lips. He was even grimier than when we'd seen him in the van. His eyes were bloodshot and had a yellow tint with dark bags hanging under them. The man's skin was scabby and peeling, pale and covered in dirt. His hair was a rat's nest of greasy gray tangles. What few teeth he had left were rotting, black at the gums. He showed them in a crooked smile as he watched us. The man took one step towards us, then froze. A wailing sound filled the room, coming from just outside. Sirens. The police. I never felt more relieved in my life. But just when we thought the man would run away, he continued to step forward, dragging his feet, mumbling inaudibly, with the knife held forward as if he was hungry for blood. My sister screamed at the top of her lungs, and at that moment, a large gunshot went off, almost making my eardrums explode. Platters of meat painted the wall, and the man fell to the floor. Behind him was a police officer. I looked over to Jessica. Her eyes were rolling back. She collapsed. Jessica! I shook her. Jessica! Jessica! No response. The paramedics came quickly and took Jessica to the hospital, with me riding along. The trip to the hospital felt like hours. Horrible thoughts raced through my head. Just as we reached the hospital, I saw my parents in the parking lot. I ran to them, hugged them, and broke down weeping. We crowded into the waiting room. After about an hour, the doctors came out revealing that Jessica had just collapsed in shock and that she was perfectly fine. We went into her room and, sure enough, Jessica was all right. I was so thankful that she was alive. About a minute later, the police arrived. They asked our parents to speak in private in the hallway, but the door was open enough that Jessica and I overheard everything they said. They took the pizza box to the crime lab and found out that the food was spiked with cyanide, a deadly poison. Thank God we didn't eat it. The police went on to say that this was the third case of attempted poisonings in town in the last month. All of the events appeared to be linked because the poison used was always cyanide and the targets were always children. We don't know what the hell was wrong with that guy. Maybe he was mental. But after that day, Jessica and I never stayed home alone again. Instead, we stayed with our cousins after school.
I work as a janitor for a hotel company in my area. It's not really a housekeeper position, as I don't clean any rooms. Rather, I'm responsible for things like cleaning the pools, cleaning the floors of the lobby and hallways, refilling the vending machines, and various tasks like that. The company owns a few different hotels in the area, and since I work for the company itself, it's not uncommon for me to be constantly going back and forth between hotels during my shifts. The shifts themselves are always in the dead of the night, so as not to disturb guests. Typically, they'll be from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Anyway, this night I was doing the usual cleaning of the floors. I'd say I was around halfway through my shift, so it was like 2 a.m. at this point, when I look up and see some guy in his 40s down the hallway walking towards me. When he gets close enough, I take out my earbuds to see what he needs. And the guy explained to me that the remote to the TV in his room was completely broken. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I wasn't a housekeeper. I never went in the rooms, and technically my job didn't have any duties consisting of customer service whatsoever. I didn't really think I would have been of any help to the guy, but I figured I could at least try. I asked him how exactly it was broken, and he responded by saying that everything on the remote worked fine, just that he didn't understand how to operate the volume button. I found this kind of odd. I've seen what the remotes look like, and I can't imagine anyone not understanding how it worked. I mean, there was only a total of like 6 buttons. I tell the dude that if he grabs it from his room and brings it to me, I would gladly show him how it worked. But for whatever reason, that set him off. The guy starts complaining, saying how bad the customer service is, and how it would be so much easier if I just came to his room quick. And so eventually I give in. I asked him what his room number was, and it turns out he was only one floor above me. Plus, I figured it wouldn't take too long just to show someone how to change the volume on a remote. And so I told him after I finished cleaning the hallway I was working on, I would go up to his room. Around 5 minutes later, and I head up to his room to knock on his door.
Hey man, I'm here to show you how the remote works.
Right after I call out, I could faintly hear voices talking. It was muttered, but I could tell there were at least 3 different voices coming from inside. The talking went on for so long that I figured the guy hadn't heard me. But that's when the voices stopped, and maybe half a minute later the door slowly started to open. The guy barely cracked the door, like I'm talking maybe an inch. Something I noticed almost right away was that all the lights to the room were off. Other than the faint glow from the TV, it was completely black in there. The guy opened the door a bit and told me to come inside. I hesitated. I did not want to go in there. Everything in me was telling me it was a bad idea.
Come on, come inside.
The guy sounded more insistent this time. I pushed the door open, but tried to remain as much in the hallway as possible. I also took the opportunity to reach for the light switch just inside the door and turn it on. And to my horror, this revealed that the guy was completely alone in the room. I know for a fact I heard multiple voices coming from the room just a few seconds earlier. My mind was racing. I started to panic, thinking more people could have been intentionally hiding in the room. I tried to quickly explain the volume switch from where I was standing, but the guy interrupted me, saying I needed to come inside and show him. I reached out my hand and asked for the remote, but the guy backed further into the room and gave me the hand signal, meaning I needed to come to him. And I figured that was it. There was absolutely no way I was going inside that room. Without saying anything, I turned around and got out of there. But before getting in my car and driving off, I would warn the people working at the front desk. I thought about calling the police, but ultimately decided against it, as the guy technically didn't do anything illegal, and I figured I couldn't really prove that he had intended to. I mean, I don't even know what his real intentions were. But at least in my mind, I definitely avoided a very dangerous and even possibly life-threatening situation that night. I was 17 and in my 3rd year of high school when this took place. The high school I went to had always been small, though for whatever reason this year in particular had a record high number of total students. And obviously with more students, this required more employees for the school, which included school janitors. In my opinion, it always felt like the school needed more janitors, and so it was actually kind of nice to see the school finally doing something about it. Though, needless to say, the process was slow. I mean, by this point it was already 2 weeks till winter break, and the school was still scrambling to find more janitors to hire. They had hired a few, but still clearly not enough to account for the total amount of students. Anyway, with winter break just around the corner, a lot of my classes had big project deadlines coming up. And so on Wednesday, me and my 3 friends decided to stay behind after school to complete a group project that we had honestly barely even started on yet. We worked in the classroom for our English class, as our English teacher, Mr. Simmons, was actually really nice, and we knew he wouldn't care if we stayed late in his classroom to complete our project. After maybe a couple hours of work, he would finally leave for the night. He left the classroom unlocked, and simply told us that when we were done, we would have to get a janitor to lock it for us. We worked for another couple hours, and that's around the time we were actually starting to finish the project. I opted to go find a janitor to lock the classroom for us, as I figured the quicker we could find one, the quicker we could go home. As I was walking down the halls alone, I couldn't help but get this incredibly eerie feeling. Being that it was winter, even though it was only around 7 p.m., there was absolutely no daylight coming in from the windows. It also didn't help that half the school's lights were already turned off by now, and that along with the fact that the school was practically empty of people, made for a really disturbing setting. I looked for a janitor for a good 10 minutes, but couldn't find anyone. It was like there was no one else on the ground floor except me and my 3 friends. As far as I knew, this wasn't normal at all. I was sure there were always at least a few janitors working during non-school hours. But that's when I walked past the stairs leading down to the basement of the school. From what I could see, there were even less lights on down there than where I was. I stood at the top of the stairs for a good couple minutes debating if I really wanted to go down there or not. But that's when I heard what sounded like a vacuum. I figured that had to be a janitor, and so I started to walk down the stairs. Now, our school was set up so that right when you go down to the basement, the classroom just to the right was the computer room. I looked inside, as that's where it sounded like the noise was coming from. But that's when I realized it wasn't a vacuum. Rather, one of the computers was being powered on. And standing right next to it was a dark figure with his back to me, only illuminated by the dim light of the computer. Even in the darkness, I could tell the guy was wearing one of our school's janitor uniforms. I had absolutely no idea why a janitor would be powering up a school computer, but I disregarded it and said,
Hey man, is there a chance you could lock up a classroom for me?
The guy stood up from his hunched position and turned around to look at me, but he didn't respond. He was just standing there.
Hello?
A few more seconds of silence, when out of nowhere, the guy started full-on sprinting in my direction. The guy ran so fast, I barely had time to register what was going on. I, of course, turned around and ran back up the stairs, just to look back and see the guy was nowhere to be found. I figured he just ran further down the basement hallway. But that's when I realized these stairs were the only way out of the basement. There weren't even windows down there. Whether that was an actual janitor or not, I didn't care. I called the police and reported the situation. I then called my friends, who came to stand at the top of the basement stairs with me and wait for the police to arrive. And when the police finally got there, we would lead them to the basement, where we would be told to wait upstairs while they searched it. 20 minutes later, the police would come back up the stairs, now with a man in at least his early 60s in a janitor's uniform and in handcuffs. I instantly recognized him as the same man I had seen in the computer room. It later turned out that the man had been living in one of the school's basement supply closets for the better part of a week, which is where he had gotten the janitor's uniform in the first place. Left behind in the closet was a makeshift mattress, many empty food and drink containers, and most disturbingly, multiple Polaroid pictures of the school itself, some even featuring unsuspecting kids in classrooms, or even just in the hallway during school hours. The guy was quite literally hiding in plain sight throughout the day, and was only getting away with it due to the vast amount of new janitors being hired, which allowed him to blend in with them. The man would of course be arrested, and this whole situation would actually cause the school to shut down for the rest of the week. The only thing still unclear, at least to me, are the guy's motives. Why he had all those Polaroid pictures of both the school and the students themselves, or even why he was in the computer room at night, still doesn't make any sense to me. I used to work as a janitor for my local shopping mall. The job itself was pretty straightforward. Empty the trash, clean the floors and windows, clean the bathrooms, etc. The only thing I didn't like about the job was that it required us to do all of this during non-business hours, which essentially meant my sleep schedule was completely opposite to that of a regular person. The mall wasn't that big, and so usually the only other people working at the same time as me were 1 or 2 security guards and maybe 1 other janitor. But the night this whole story takes place, I was the only janitor scheduled. As far as I can remember, there was supposed to be 1 security guard scheduled, though I hadn't seen him yet, and it was already 3 AM and halfway through my shift, so I honestly don't even know if he was there or not. It wasn't completely unheard of for me to not run into the security guard for a while, but this guy specifically was notorious for not showing up to a lot of his shifts, so there was actually a decent chance I was working completely alone that night. I was doing the regular, cleaning the floors while I slowly made my way towards the back of the mall. Something I should mention is I would always work with my headphones on. Now, I get it, probably not the best idea, as it made it almost impossible to hear anything around me, but frankly 18-year-old me couldn't have cared less. Or, that was at least until I noticed something. One of those gates used to close up stores in malls wasn't closed all the way. It was like only halfway closed. I instantly took off my headphones and narrowed it down to 2 possibilities. Either one of the store's employees didn't properly close it for the night, or someone broke in after it had already been closed. Now, this took place in a pretty small town, where at least for the most part everyone knew everyone. The crime rate here is low to say the least, and so stupidly, I just instantly assumed it wasn't closed properly by an employee. Even though I was only a janitor, I did have access to a spare set of keys for all the stores, so I figured I'd just lock it up myself. And so I did. But as I was doing so, I swear I could hear some sort of rustling sound coming from further in the store. It sounded like clothes being moved and rubbing together. If I'm being completely honest, this shook me up pretty bad. I could feel my heart start to race as I was coming to the realization that there might actually be someone in there. But ultimately, I figured my mind had to have been playing tricks on me. I felt this sort of urge to go inside to confirm this. I can't really explain it. but I guess it kind of felt like the only way to put my mind at ease was for me to see for myself that it was nothing. So I turned on my flashlight that I always carry around while I'm working and walked inside. It was deathly quiet in there, but I started slowly looking around with my flashlight. The store wasn't that big, and so this only went on for a couple minutes when pretty much everything had been searched except the very back of the store. I started walking over there when just to the left of me, I could hear what sounded like breathing. I almost instantly pointed my flashlight to my left, and to my absolute horror, this revealed a man in one of those purge masks you'd see in the movies. It was clear the guy was trying to hide in a clothes rack. I also quickly noticed the guy was carrying a knife, not like a small pocket knife, but rather a large hunting knife. I'm not gonna lie, I was so scared I froze. Before any words could be said, the guy lifted his finger up to his mouth as a way to signal me to be quiet. At that point, I figured I'd seen enough. I turned around and ran faster than I've ever run outside the mall and into my car in the parking lot. Before I could even catch my breath, I floored it out of there while dialing 911. I wanted to call the security guard that was supposedly inside the mall to at least warn him, but for one, I didn't know his phone number, and two, like I said earlier, I didn't even know if he showed up for work that night. But I did leave a voicemail for my boss, and obviously called the police explaining everything that had just happened. I gave the best description of the guy that I could, but like I mentioned earlier, he had been wearing a mask, so there wasn't really much I could say. The next day when I showed up to work, that store specifically was completely roped off. It turns out it was robbed, and had been before the police were able to get there. A part of me feels bad for not doing anything, but I mean the guy had a knife. I think I'm justified in saying I'm not going to risk my life for the safety of some items in a store. As far as I know, the security guard that was supposed to work that night got fired. As for me, I worked that job for another 2 years after that. Ever since the robbery happened, the mall would always have at least 3 or 4 security guards present at night. I like to think this helped me in not experiencing any more terrifying things on that job again. But this will forever go down as one of the most terrifying things I've ever had to experience.
Most people don't even believe me when I tell them, but I have a job where I work from home. People in my area mostly work with cars or in the medical industry. There aren't many jobs where I live. Thankfully, I was able to land a decent paying job that let me work from my home office. It definitely comes with its struggles, but it is hands down the best job opportunity available to me right now. It isn't always perfect. It definitely comes with its pitfalls. Sometimes you have to sit at your computer even when there isn't any work to be done. It's also very easy to get distracted. But I think my biggest problem has to do with the house itself. It's kind of creepy. The house itself is an old Victorian, like really old. We're talking mid-1800s. A family friend owned the house and sold it to me for a very fair price, basically gave it to me. I was super excited because it meant I got a nice big house to live in by myself along with my girlfriend. I'm a natural loner and I don't really care for social interaction, so I had a nice big house all to myself and girlfriend and job where I work from home with very minimal social interaction with other people. That was basically my ideal life. But the house's age meant that it was going to be scary at times. And I don't mean with ghosts or anything like that, but sometimes I hear the house settling in or making noises that I can't explain. I've actually had quite a few instances where I'll be sitting down and doing some work and then out of nowhere, I hear a noise that I just can't rationalize. I go exploring throughout the house only to find that nothing has changed. It's as ominous as it is frustrating. I did just about what anyone else in the world would do. I started to use background noise to drown out the disturbances. First, I tried those quiet instrumentals on YouTube. You know, the ones that last 5 hours and they're supposed to put you at ease or something. It didn't really work for me because I couldn't get my computer to be loud enough to drown out all the noises. It was also not very good at keeping my attention. There was one week where my work was really slow and there wasn't a whole lot to do. I still had to sit at my computer though. There was an understanding that I was allowed to basically do anything I wanted as long as I was available to my coworkers if something came through that needed to be done. I didn't quite know what to do with this time and just started watching documentaries on YouTube. It was actually pretty fun. I learned a lot. And so that next week when things started picking up again, I just instinctively turned on a documentary. I wouldn't be able to have all of my focus on it, but it was a lot better than having some ambient noise. It actually helped distract me from the sounds of the house. I guess I just didn't have enough mental focused energy to notice any of the other sounds going on around me, if that makes any sense. Well, it had been about 2 weeks of me watching documentaries while I worked. Everything seemed to be good, until one Friday morning. I started work at 8 and this must have been around 10. I was sitting at my office chair working while I listened to a documentary about certain conspiracy theories, when all of a sudden, I heard an abrupt banging noise coming from upstairs. Like I had said, I hadn't been distracted by any noises for a while by this point, so the fact that I noticed this noise meant that it was probably serious. My fight or flight kicked in. You might laugh at me, but when I work, I keep a knife next to me. I ran upstairs with the knife and looked around for any suspicious noises. The banging had stopped and I didn't know where it had come from. I knew what section of the house that I heard it from, but there didn't seem to be anything out of place. I stood there for a few moments and then I heard it again. It happened right on the other side of my door. I immediately braced myself for there to be some kind of animal or something trying to get in. I didn't really know what to expect. I opened my door to see that the screen door had not been properly closed. My girlfriend didn't close it all the way when she left for work that morning. It was also pretty windy that day, so it was just going back and forth causing a banging noise when the wind got bad. This was kind of a breaking point for me. I didn't want to live my life in constant paranoia and fear of some kind of attacker coming into my home. We live in a safe area. There's never been a serious threat. And I have run around my house with a knife way too many times now. I honestly felt kind of stupid. So I made a decision. I was no longer going to assume that someone was breaking in if and when I heard a sound. I put the knife in my dresser in my bedroom and decided that I was going to just be in to work while I was working, except for my documentary, of course. So there I was the next week. It happened on a Wednesday. I was sitting in my office doing exactly what I had set out to do. I was working, ignoring the noises and listening to a documentary. I remembered the exact part of the documentary I was on when I heard it. The sound was the loudest sound I had heard in the house up to that point. At first, I reassured myself that it was nothing and that I need to fight against this paranoia. The sound continued, and I couldn't take my mind off of it. After about 5 minutes of listening to what sounded like rummaging and walking, I went upstairs to check. Bear in mind, I didn't have any weapon on me and I was expecting some kind of reasonable explanation. When I got to my kitchen, I saw that the front door was wide open. The cabinets were all open, and there was a strange man rummaging through my stuff. I didn't notice until after the fact, but he had been eating something. I remember screaming at him. I don't remember what I said, but it was something to the effect of, "What are you doing in my house?" obviously. Then he just ran off. Didn't say a single word. He took a loaf of bread with him, but I don't think he took anything else, other than what I had eaten before I came upstairs. I reasoned with myself that he must have been some sort of homeless man or something. I don't know why else he would steal a loaf of bread from a very ordinary-looking house. And this was the worst thing that could have happened. On some instinctual level, it had proved all of my worst fears right. There was some kind of danger in my house, and of course, it was the one time when I didn't have my knife on me. I lucked out that he didn't try to hurt me or anything, but it's still horrifying to see nonetheless. I just work at a local coffee shop now. It's honestly my only way to stay sane.
This happened when I was 12 years old. I lived in a small town with my parents. My mom battled cancer for a long time and left us right after my birthday. I still remember crying while my dad hugged me tightly. He also cried, but silently. The house we lived in was filled with my mother's memory, which made our lives even more difficult. After a month of pain and suffering, my dad decided to go back to his hometown in Florida. His older sister, Aunt Bethany, lived there, inheriting my grandparents' house. She told us repeatedly to visit her, but my dad shrugged it off previously. One night, after a quiet dinner, he sat me down and said, "Ian, how about you and I stay with Aunt Bethany for a while? I can show you where I grew up and we'll have fun there." I nodded my head, saying, "Okay. Will Mom watch over me if I go away?" My dad's eyes sparkled as he tried hard to hold back his tears. He took a deep breath and said, "Your mom will watch over you no matter where you go. She loved you more than anyone in this world. Always remember that. We had a moment of mending our broken hearts and began a new start, hoping for a new life. One fine morning, we packed our luggage and set out for Florida. Blossom County was a small township with close neighborhoods. As we drove by the neighborhood, I saw a group of kids standing on the sidewalks with their bicycles and staring at me. That was probably the first time I realized how it feels to be the new kid in town. We stopped in front of an old wooden house that was being renovated. The two workers were painting it while a woman stood outside and instructed them. My dad honked the car horn and she came to us with a huge smile on her face. She hugged my dad, saying, "Oh, poor Jimmy," and then turned towards me. I was standing near the car door, quietly, as everything was so new to me. She crouched down at my level and said in a soft voice, "I am your Aunt Bethany. You can call me Beth. Would you like to eat some chocolate cookies that I baked for you?" I nodded my head yes, and she held my hand in the most caring way possible. That's how I moved to my grandparents' house. After my mom, if anyone cared for me like I was their own, it was my dad and Aunt Beth. Sometimes in my sleep, I could feel her caring hand brushing my hair while she wept, feeling bad for me. Slowly, that large hole in my small heart started to repair with the love showered by my aunt and my dad. My dad also started working and talking to people. In short, we all were trying our best to move on in life. Aunt Beth introduced me to the neighborhood kids, and things weren't so hard for me like I expected them to be. I became friends with Kiara and Austin, who were about my age. We used to roam around the town on our bicycles. One Sunday afternoon, we were playing on the playground near the town church. I was about to throw the frisbee at Kiara when I saw a small group of people carrying a coffin towards the back of the church. I asked them why they were going behind the church when Austin told me the town's local cemetery lies behind the church. I remembered how it was the same way we carried Mom to bury in the graveyard. Kiara suddenly said, "Halloween is coming. Do you guys believe in ghosts?" I shrugged off my shoulders, saying, "If ghosts were real, my mom would have come back. She loved me the most." They didn't say anything further. The conversation stopped right away. Seeing the awkwardness on their face, I said, "Have you guys ever been to that cemetery?" Austin replied, "Yes, I have, many times." "My dad is the pastor," Kiara said. "I never went inside though. Mom says kids shouldn't go there." A sense of curiosity lurked in my heart, and I said, "Let's go take a look." Even though Kiara said not to, we somehow convinced her and started walking towards the cemetery, taking our bicycles. The old marble epitaphs stood like forgotten soldiers of a long-lost war. A long-lasting silence roamed around this place. We walked quietly so that we wouldn't disturb the dead. "I think we should go back now," Kiara said in a scared voice. "Yeah, tomorrow is Halloween. It's best not to be here before Halloween," Austin replied. I got annoyed with them and said, "I told you, there's no such thing as ghosts. You don't believe me? Fine. I'll come here tomorrow night and prove to you guys." "You're telling me you will step into this cemetery after dark, that too on a Halloween night?" "I don't believe you," Austin said while making fun of me. I walked close to him and said, "We will see that tomorrow." After coming back home, I couldn't help but think about that cemetery. Something about that place was pulling me, like a magnet. The next morning, when I woke up, I saw every house in the neighborhood was getting decorated for Halloween. Pumpkin heads were placed on the porch with green lanterns and spooky masks. I was eating my breakfast when my Aunt Beth came with a medium-sized box. "Guess what this is, Ian?" she asked. "I don't know. You tell me," I replied. She opened the box, and I saw a Spider-Man costume inside it. "Your dad told me you love Spider-Man, so I made this for you," she said. Taking the costume out, I couldn't help but smile because I loved it. I hugged her and thanked her for making it. I rushed to my room to try it out immediately. I was taking off my shirt when I felt someone whispered in my ear, "Don't go there, Ian." "Mom?" I took off the shirt in one go and looked around frantically. Did I just hear my mom's voice? But how is that possible? She's dead. I stood in the empty room, staring at nowhere for about 5 to 7 minutes. I heard a knock on the door, and my dad spoke. "Ian, come out and show us how you look in that costume." I ignored the entire matter and came out wearing the Spider-Man costume. Everyone got excited seeing me, and the entire day went by laughing and discussing what we will do that night. Around 6, my friends came over to go for trick-or-treating, even though we were big kids. But still, who can say no to candies? Kiara dressed as Batman, and Austin as a magician. Our trio made quite an impression in the neighborhood as we set out to celebrate Halloween. Every town person looked at us and gave us candy without even asking for it. When we realized we'd collected enough, we went to the playground near the church and sat on a merry-go-round. On that full moon night, I couldn't help but notice the darkness behind the church. The cemetery is that way. After eating a hell of a lot of candy, I got up with great confidence. So, it's time to show you guys that there's no such thing as ghosts. Let's go, I said. What? I'm not going to the cemetery, Kiara said, nodding her head in no. Her ponytail dangled in the air behind her Batman mask as she refused right away. Come on, we won't be there long anyway, Austin said. He too charged up hearing me, and we all started to walk towards the cemetery. The area was empty, as it was a distinctive part of town. I didn't want to get caught by anyone, so I told them to be quiet and follow me. I was almost near the entrance when I heard that female voice again. Don't do this, Ian. I turned back, but didn't see anyone. What? What is it? Kiara asked in a fearful voice. Nothing. Let's go, I replied. The cemetery was flooding with the pale moonlight. The chirping crickets and hollow wind created a spooky ambience all around us. It was not the ideal place for anyone at night, of all Halloween. After roaming for 2 to 3 minutes, I looked at them and said, "See, there's no such thing as a ghost." I was about to say more when Austin pointed at a tree in some distance. Kiara and I followed his eyes and saw a man hanging from the branch of a tree. His neck was tied to a rope while his body swayed in the air like a pendulum. What is that? Why is he... No, relax. That's just a stupid joke. I'm sure someone hung a dummy to scare off people for Halloween. Maybe we should take a look then. What? I'm not going near it, even if it is a dummy. Kiara refused to go near it. Hence, Austin and I told her to wait there and went to check the dummy. I won't lie, but my heartbeat got faster as I walked closer to the tree. I was inches away when I saw a woman dressed in a gown standing behind an epitaph on my left and staring at me. The gown felt so similar, just like the one my mom wore when we buried her. It took me a second to recognize her face. It was my mom. She was standing there with a painful face and telling me, "Run. Run away, Ian. This place is not for you." I don't know why I got so adamant. Maybe I was angry with her for leaving me too early. Maybe I thought if I don't listen to her, she will come back to set me straight, like she always did when I disobeyed her. I walked right under the dummy and stared at its face. I won't lie, but the dummy looked so real. Austin stared at it too for a few seconds, then gasped in fear. Oh my God! This is not a Halloween prop. I know this man. This is Mr. Walker. He committed suicide. The moment we realized this was a real dead body hanging over our heads, my stomach dropped. Suddenly, the dead body opened its wide eyes and gave a big grin. Austin fell on the muddy ground, screaming, and I stood like a statue in shock. Austin and Kiara ran towards the exit. They kept saying, "Run, Ian, run!" But I couldn't move a muscle. What happened next still feels like a dream. I felt a touch and saw my mom was holding my hand. She smiled at me and said, "Let me take you home." She escorted me towards the exit of the cemetery, and I ran home with my friends. The next morning, our town shook in horror, finding out about Mr. Walker committing suicide in the cemetery. We didn't tell anyone whatever we experienced that night. Austin and Kiara saw me walking towards the gate all by myself. That was the last time I saw my mom. But I still believe, wherever she is, she will always watch over me. I'm still in shock with this incident. It's been 2 years now, but whenever I close my eyes, this horrifying memory keeps playing in the loop. After graduating high school with good grades, I got into the university of my choice. I was never a popular girl in high school, but somehow in university, I ended up in a sorority house with the most popular girls of the university. It was the week before Halloween, and most of the girls went to their hometown to celebrate with their family and friends. There were 5 of us who stayed back. We decided to arrange a small late-night party in our sorority so that we don't feel left out from the celebration. Our house mother, Mrs. Marlin, was a nagging widow. She was a bit rude and often got into fights with girls over petty matters. My friend Elena said, The old hag is just jealous of young girls. On the morning of Halloween, as I came downstairs, I saw everyone was decorating the big living room with various Halloween props. Elena and Jesse were busy hanging cobwebs and bats on the ceiling, whereas Martha and Ruthie were making lists of the amount of booze and snacks we would be needing. Knowing them for the last year, I said, "Guys, you know boys aren't allowed." "Yes, Miss Fansucker, we know that," Martha replied. I laughed it off and started helping them for the party. As the night fell, the streets were blooming with green neon lights and people running around in all kinds of Halloween costumes. I sat at the front of the window while everyone else was still getting ready to go out. Kids dressed as goblins, Superman. A ghost was knocking door to door with their candy buckets, screaming in cheerful voices, "Trick or treat." I remember doing this in my childhood with my foster friends. I had a friend named Bethany who often shared her candy with me. Those days were fun. "Come on, let's go." I saw Elena coming down with others. I came out and stood on the sidewalk with Martha and Ruthie. Elena and Jesse were locking the door when Mrs. Marlin spoke in her annoyingly squeaky voice from her room's window. "Don't sneak boys in on your way back. Keep your dirty business out of my house." "Yes, we know how much that would make you sad to see us having fun with boys," Elena screamed, and we all couldn't help but laugh. Mrs. Marlin went on cursing us, and we started the walk. People were going crazy like always. We saw a bunch of young boys and girls chugging beer like water on the open street. We lived in a small neighborhood where cops didn't usually strike on occasions like that. After walking for 15 minutes, we left the madding crowd and got onto an empty highway. The liquor shop was adjacent to a gas station. Generally, cars are always passing by the high road, but that night, everything seemed awfully quiet. When we reached the gas station, we saw the liquor store was just about to close. Martha and I waited outside while others rushed in to get the booze. No boys can be acceptable, but no booze on Halloween was too much of a sacrifice for us. Martha lit a cigarette, and I watched the streetlights light up the long, empty highway. I might have chatted with her, but her boyfriend called and she got busy. She went in the corner to get some privacy, and, like always, I was left alone. I took out my phone and started to scroll through my Facebook feed when an uncanny feeling grabbed me. I took my eyes off the phone and saw a minivan parked at the gas station at some distance. When we arrived here, this van wasn't there, so I realized it came a few moments earlier. I watched to see who gets out of the van. When a minute went by and no one came out, I felt very weird. I could guess whoever was inside the van was watching me. I thought to go inside and hurry my friends, but I didn't want to leave Martha alone either. I had to bear with this disturbing event for a minute more when, finally, everyone came out. As soon as the 5 of us gathered around to check if we had all the things, I saw the minivan slowly took off. I thought whoever was inside might have been scared, knowing we were a group of 5. I didn't tell anyone about this because we still had a long walk home and I had no intention to spook them. We started to head back after getting everything. Martha, Elena, and Ruthie were walking ahead, while Jesse and I followed them. I was constantly looking back to see if the minivan was following us. Thankfully, it wasn't. When we entered the neighborhood, the streets were mostly empty as everyone went to Halloween parties and kids went home. I was relieved that soon we will be home when I noticed a minivan coming from the opposite direction. It stopped at some distance, flashing the bright headlights right into our eyes. "Hey, you jerk!" Elena screamed. "What the hell?" Martha replied annoyedly. They all started to scream and threatened whoever was in the minivan to shut the damn lights when the driver parked the minivan under a bushy tree near the sidewalk. As soon as the sound of the engine stopped, Jesse screamed, saying, "Looks like no one invited you to a party because of your weird nature." Everyone laughed hilariously. It was the same van from the gas station. We were about to walk past the van when the driver's side door opened and an average-height man came out dressed like Michael Myers. I got chills because that man's costume looked bloody realistic. "Whoa, that's a hell of a costume," Elena said in a mocking tone. "Elena, please, we should just go." "I'm not liking this guy," I said in a scared voice. "Why? Are you scared of this pimp?" "Come on, he's just a creep with no friends of his own." "Take that, you creep." Elena went on abusing him, but he stood silently and watched us. We walked past him finally, and for one last time, I looked back. What I saw made my skin crawl in fear. He was counting us like a small kid who counts stars in the sky. We stood on the porch while Jesse unlocked the door. I noticed Mrs. Marlin's lights were out. The neighborhood was suddenly quiet, like a dark, hollow tunnel. Except for the chirping crickets, there was no sound. Everyone got inside and started the party, but I couldn't shake off the image of this creep dressed as Michael Myers. I slowly went to the window and peeked behind the curtains. The minivan was now parked on the opposite side of our house, and the man was standing, leaning his back on the back of the van and watching our house directly. I stepped back and told everyone. Even though we wanted to, we couldn't call the cops because he wasn't doing anything, just stalking us like a creep. Plus, it's Halloween. He has every right to dress as Michael Myers. Suddenly, the lights went out. "What the hell?" I screamed. "Relax. It's probably the old fuse that I told Elena to change long back," Ruthie said. Elena rolled her eyes at her, and Ruthie picked up a torch to go down to the basement. I went to look out the window, and this time, the van was gone. "Where did he go?" I asked. "Somewhere he can score chicks." "Go get the candles now," Elena said. I heard Ruthie's footsteps fading down the stairs. Jesse and I went to get the candles, while Elena and Martha sat in the living room, turning on their phone's flashlight. I was in my room, taking out the candles from my desk drawer, when my eyes went to Mrs. Marlin's window. I felt someone was standing at her window. I flashed my phone's torchlight to get a clear view and fell on a familiar face. The guy dressed as Michael Myers was standing at Mrs. Marlin's window and looking at me. He slowly lifted his right hand to show me what he was grabbing. Believe me or not, I almost had a heart attack as I found him holding the severed head of our house mother like a trophy. I screamed at the top of my lungs and ran downstairs. Jesse, Elena, and Martha freaked out hearing me. They couldn't believe that the creepy guy murdered Mrs. Marlin. Elena and Jesse went to check all the locks of the doors and windows of our house, while I stood there sobbing like a 9-year-old after witnessing the most horrible sight of my life. Martha dialed 911 and told the cops to come soon, as we were in great danger. The cops told us to be calm, and they will be here soon. But I knew even if they drive at the speed of a rocket, it'll take 20 to 30 minutes to reach here. I was contemplating what to do when I heard Jesse scream. Martha and I ran in her direction, and we saw Elena was stuck to the back door as a sharp harpoon went through her stomach, making her entrails gush out. She coughed blood while staring at us, and then became still forever. "Oh my God, he's going to kill us without even entering the house," Jesse screamed. "Where's Ruthie?" I said in a panic. We called out to her, standing near the basement stairs, when we heard her voice from the backyard.
"I'm here. I came to drop off the garbage. Why are you all screaming?"
We three ran towards the back door again. Elena's bloody body was still standing there. "Ruthie, run! Run! He's behind you!" Martha screamed. Ruthie turned back, and from the dark corner of the yard, an arrow went through her left eye. She didn't even get the chance to scream. The crazy psycho pulled her body into the dark, and we stood there, watching our friends get hunted like this. We realized that if we go near the windows, this man will shoot us with his weapons. Out of options, we curled onto the floor, holding each other's hands while crying in terror. Heavy footsteps and wild breathing went on in our backyard as the psycho threaded back and forth, looking for an opportunity to get his hands on us. I don't remember how long we waited, but when the cop car's siren sounded from a distance, we heard the minivan drive away. It has been 2 years since then. The cops haven't been able to find the murderer in the Michael Myers costume. Martha, Jesse, and I left the sorority and went back to our hometown. I have no contact with them, but every Halloween, someone sends me postcards with wishes written by my dead friends Elena and Ruthie. I know it's him, and all he's waiting for is one single opportunity to get the three of us under one roof and finish what he started on a cursed night of Halloween.
I lost my phone 2 days ago while out for a jog. It must have slipped from my pocket. Luckily, I got an email from a kind stranger the next day telling me they had my device. The person who found my phone wanted to meet me in the park. I asked if I could just swing by somewhere to pick it up, but they insisted in their email that they would be at the park on a bench near the fountain. So I pulled on my jacket and headed out into the snow. There was a woman waiting for me. She sat on the bench next to a frozen fountain. I stopped and watched her. The woman seemed familiar, but I couldn't place her. Early 30s, black hair, attractive features half hidden by a cap and scarf. She looked my way. I waved and walked over, boots crunching the fresh powder. "Hello," I said, flashing my best game show smile. "You found my phone?" blue eyes regarded me from under a dark wool cap. "Sit down for a second, Jeremy." My grin started to dip, but I pinned it in place. "Sure," I joined the stranger on the bench. "No offense, and I truly appreciate you finding my phone, but I'm in a bit of a... You don't remember me?" Should I?" The woman looked away. "Of course you wouldn't recognize me." She sighed and stood up. "Hey," I said. "I'm sorry. I've got a terrible memory. If you could just give me back the phone, you can have the phone back when you remember my name." I felt an ember of anger start to grow in my stomach. This psycho dragged me all the way out to a park in the snow, and now she's playing games. "Listen, lady, I'm sorry, I don't know who you are. Just give me my phone back and we're done here." She ignored me and began to walk away, hands in her pockets. "Hey, I'm talking to you," I shouted, hurrying after her. I reached out for her shoulder. Before I could touch her, the woman turned and sprayed me with something she had in her hand. The pain was immediate and stunning. My entire face felt like I'd plunged into a pot of boiling water. I lost sight of the world as my eyes swelled and watered. I struggled to breathe. I'd heard stories about pepper spray, but always chalked it up to exaggeration. If anything, stories about getting sprayed didn't do the compound justice. I screamed and curled up on the ground, pawing at my face. Eventually, I crawled off the path. I wiped snow across my face, trying to wash away the remaining pepper spray. By the time I was able to see more than a burning blur, the woman was gone. After I got back to my apartment, all I wanted to do was shower and go to bed. But I wasn't going to let that bitch in the park get away with stealing my phone and assaulting me. I opened my laptop. The girl was familiar. My first thought was that we knew each other in college or high school. I fired up Facebook. "What the fuck?" I growled. I couldn't get into my account. Facebook kept telling me my password was wrong. I logged into a backup account that I used to keep tabs on people that blocked me. When I searched for my own profile, I almost choked. Someone was posting insane status updates pretending they were me. Threatening family and friends, shit-talking the government, even my boss. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. That woman was trying to ruin my life. I needed advice. I opened up Zoom on the computer and called my best friend Barry. I could tell by his expression when he answered that he'd seen the crazy posts on my Facebook. "Are you okay, dude?" he asked. "I'm not doing that. It's that psycho from the park, the one that found my phone. She won't give it back. She's fucking with me." "Why?" I threw my hands up. "Dude, I don't fucking know. She says we know each other, but I can't remember her. She won't give me back the phone until I figure out her name." "Describe her." "White, black hair, blue eyes, about 5'2", around our age. She'd be kinda cute if she wasn't actively trying to sabotage my life. Wait, I got an email. Shit, it's from her." Barry was practically vibrating in his seat. Read it. "Have you figured it out yet?" the email began. "If not, here's a clue. I thought the world of you, and you ruined my life. All I wanted was for you to like me, but you cost me everything. Did you make the last high school reunion? I looked for you." There was an attachment to the email. It was a screenshot of my bank account. She'd logged on using my phone and drained it all. My bank password was saved right on the device. All of my information. "Fuck!" I shouted, punching the table. Barry whistled. "She's not playing around. It sounds like a jilted lover, my man. Who did you date in high school?" "Who didn't I date?" Barry winked. "Sly dog. Well, think hard. She said you meant the world to her and... Hey, hold on a second, someone's at the door." I saw Barry leave the screen to answer his door. "Can I help?" he said. A loud buzzing sound interrupted him. There was a crash. "Barry?" I asked. The woman from the park walked into view and sat down. "Hi, Jeremy," she said. "What did you do? What is going on?" "Come to Barry's place. If you call the police, I'll be gone before you get here. You'll never know why this is happening. Come alone. Hurry." She closed the computer, ending the Zoom. Calling the cops was my first instinct, but if the woman disappeared on me, I'd be fucked. My bank account, my social media. I kept a gun in the top of my closet, a small revolver I'd inherited from my dad. This didn't know who she was messing with. I took a cab to Barry's, then went around back to the alley. The woman was expecting me to come in the front door. Instead, I climbed the ladder on his fire escape. Barry never locked his windows, just in case any of our buddies needed to stay over without his asshole landlord interrogating them in the hall. His apartment was dark when I reached his floor. I slid the window open carefully. No sign of anybody. I slipped into the room, took 2 steps, then felt a pinch in my neck. The floor rushed up to meet me. When I woke up, the apartment was bright. "Awake, sleepyhead?" a voice asked from behind me. I tried to turn, but I was duct taped to the chair I was sitting in. A woman from the park walked into view. Without her coat and scarf, she looked even more familiar, but I still didn't remember her. "What's my name?" she asked. "Where's Barry?" The woman shook her head. "You still don't know. It would be sad if it wasn't so infuriating." "Why are you doing this?" I snarled. "Who are you? What did I do to you?" The stranger pulled over a chair from the kitchen and sat across from me. "I used to think you were all so cool," she said. "I idolized you. All of you. God, you and Barry were like princes in high school. Star athletes, bright smiles, and fast cars. And the girls around you, so glamorous. I was a mess in those days, a background character in a show you all starred in. I just wanted to be your friend, to be like you. I tried so hard to get you to notice me. So when you finally asked me to go with you to a party, it was the best day of my life." A memory paced at the edge of my awareness. A face. A name. The woman leaned closer. She smelled like vanilla and dust. "Do you remember yet?" she asked. I shook my head. "Max Baker's graduation party," the woman continued. "We all went. I was so flattered to be included. We talked all night, you and me. We even danced. And then those red and blue lights filled up the windows. The cops came in. You and Barry slipped off into the bathroom with the white powder. You wanted me to try, but I wouldn't. And when the police came rolling in and they searched us, where do you think they found the drugs?" Cassidy. The name hit me like a brick. It slithered into my mind along with a face. The woman's face, only 15 years younger. "Cassidy," I said. She smiled. "Now you remember. You put the drugs in my purse. You, or maybe Barry. It doesn't matter. Either way, I was the one that got to spend the night in jail. I was the one who had to find a lawyer, to beg my parents to believe me. They didn't. You cost me everything. I lost my scholarship, my family thought I was a junkie, and the worst part, none of you bothered to reach out. You used me and threw me away and didn't even remember doing it. I'm sorry," I whispered. "I was young." "So was I," Cassidy said. She stood up and walked over to me, getting behind my chair, turning it so I could see the kitchen. Barry lay on the tile floor in a puddle of blood. My revolver was on the ground between us. "The neighbors heard the gunshot," Cassidy said, pulling a syringe from her pocket. "Police are on their way. I'm going to give you another dose, then untie you. And then, I'll leave the same way you came in. When the cops get here, they're going to wonder why your friend was shot with your gun. And, of course, you did threaten to kill him on Facebook." "I'm sorry," I said again. I felt the needle enter my neck. "I know," Cassidy said. "I woke up in a jail cell, groggy and disoriented. There was no sign of Cassidy. I immediately called my lawyer. We were able to meet, and he told me that I'm facing charges of attempted murder. Barry survived the gunshot, but is lingering in a coma. If he wakes up, he can tell the police what really happened, but if he dies, I'll be in serious trouble. All I can do now is wait." I always enjoyed riding the subway to and from work. Each day was a new experience. Sometimes those experiences were ugly. Once I watched 2 women fight over a handbag until one of them smashed a glass bottle into the other's cheek. There was so much blood. I remember it splattering against the window like rain. Another time, a homeless man sat down in the seat across from me, looked me in the eye, pulled out what looked suspiciously like a human ear, and began to chew. I saw that man often on the train. Eventually, he faded into the background. It was wild, but I could tune it all out by focusing on my laptop. That computer was my life. I did most of my work there, played games, watched movies. I was even writing a screenplay. My whole world was on that laptop. So, you can imagine how devastated I was the morning I left it on the subway. You gotta understand that I was distracted. I was getting a phone call just as we arrived at my stop. It was Jane. "Hey, I'm so glad you called me back," I said, squeezing through the crowd at the subway door. "I'm sorry, babe. I promise that You were so pathetic. You know that, Dan?" Jane said. "My mom was right about you. I'm gonna give you another chance, but from now on, you are on thin ice." Babe, you won't be sorry. Shit. I was standing at the bottom of the stairs that would take me to the street. It had taken me that long to realize that the familiar weight of my laptop bag was missing from my shoulder. "Dan, is everything okay?" "I have to call you back. Sorry." I hung up and ran back just in time to see the train pulling away into the tunnel. Shit. I raced up the stairs. The street was full of rushing figures and traffic. I hailed the first cab I could catch and told them to hurry to the next stop for the subway. We made it as the train was pulling in, but when I searched the car, my laptop was missing. The rest of the morning was a blur. I made it into the office late. My asshole boss Henry stopped by and pulled me from my fog. "Hey, I noticed that you didn't copy me on that email to the board," Henry said, leaning against the wall of my cubicle. "We're not supposed to do that," I muttered. "I don't give a shit what the company wants you to do." Henry leaned in, breath smelling like eggs and something sweeter, maybe rum. "No backtalk. When I tell you to jump, all you need to do is ask me off what bridge. Next time, copy me on the damn email. Now smile. You look so damn sour." I gritted my teeth as Henry walked away, swallowing everything I wished I could say to him. There was a notification blinking on my screen when I turned back to my monitor. It was an email. From myself. It was in my work inbox, sent from my personal account. The subject line read, "Why do you put up with it?" There was no text in the body of the email, but there was an attachment. I opened it and gasped. It was a picture of me at my desk with Henry looming over me. Someone must have taken it from the office only moments ago. And if they sent it through my personal email account... "My laptop," I hissed. Someone found it that morning, and they were using it to mess with me already. Hell, they were stalking me if they were in my office. I stood up, peeking over the top of my cubicle like a meerkat. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. No strange, shadowy figures lurking by the copier. Another email came in from my account. "I'm going to help you." Again, only a subject line, no message and no attachment this time. I stood up and scanned the room. No sign of Henry. I decided to slip out, staying low until I made it to the elevator. When I got home, I locked and bolted my door. I hadn't seen anyone following me, but whoever had my laptop would already know my address. It was probably how they found my office. Everything about me really was on that computer. I needed time to think, to plan, and I needed a fucking drink. I was in the middle of mixing a whiskey and Coke when my phone began to buzz. "You're such a fucking asshole," Jane yelled as soon as I picked up. "Jane, wait, what? I don't understand. Why?" "I saw the message you sent me on Instagram. If you're gonna break up with me, have the decency to do it in person. And how dare you tell me it's my fault for nagging you? I was trying to help you. You were so... Wait, did you just send me another message now? Jane, no, don't open it. I lost my... You asshole! Well, if you were so in love with my sister, you go ahead. You two deserve each other." "Jane, that wasn't me. Someone hacked my account and... Jane? Are you there?" She'd hung up. I picked my drink up, spilling some from a shaky hand. The bastard who stole my laptop was pretending to be me and ruining my life. Thump, thump, thump. Boom, boom, boom. My neighbors were at it again, blasting their music at full volume. It wasn't even 11 a.m. I debated knocking on their door and asking them to turn it down, but last time I tried, they just laughed. My phone buzzed again, an email this time from me. "You can do better than Jane." "Fuck you, give me back my laptop," I replied. A few minutes passed before I got a new message. "He's so mean." The email had an attachment, another picture. I opened it and felt the drink slip from my hand. It shattered on the kitchen floor. I recognized the bathroom. It was the men's room from my office. Henry was sitting on the toilet in the handicap stall. Someone had gutted him, slitting his beer belly open so that his guts poured onto his lap. "Oh, God," I whispered. I felt sick. I wanted to crawl under my sink and find peace in silent darkness, but my neighbor's music was so loud my dishes were shaking in the sink. Suddenly, the music stopped. There was a knock at my door. Before I could take a step towards the door, another email came in. It's time we talk. I stood in the kitchen staring at the door to my apartment. The knock came again. I took a deep breath, grabbed a butcher knife from the block on the counter, and walked to the door. When I opened it, a small man with white hair and a black mustache was looking at me. He was wearing my laptop bag. "Mind if I come in?" the man asked. "I think I have something that belongs to you." He looked so familiar, but I couldn't place him. Sure. I held out my hand for the laptop, but he only smiled and shook his head before walking in. "Not yet," he told me. We stood in my living room, him with a little grin, me trying to push down a panic attack. "Mind if I sit down, Dan?" the man asked. I nodded. "Wait, how do you know my name?" He lifted the laptop bag. "Oh yeah," I said. "It's nice to see you somewhere other than the subway, Dan. You look good. Healthy. Have we met some?" The connection hit me like a thunderbolt. The homeless man, the one who'd looked at me in the eye when he'd started snagging on body parts. The frequent passenger. He looked much better shaved and showered. The man smiled wider. "Ah, now you see it. Why are you messing with my life?" His smile disappeared. "Messing with your life, Dan? I'm saving you, fixing you. Christ, you let the whole world walk over you, then apologize when they get your blood on their boots." "That's not true," I mumbled. "Sure it is. I've watched you for so long. I'm not homeless. I'm sure you thought that. I'm actually wealthy, Dan. So wealthy that I've gotten bored with my own life. Now my hobby is helping others put their lives right." "You caused Jane to dump me," I whispered, "and my boss. Jesus, what you did to Henry." "Technically, you dumped Jane. Well, me as you, but let's not split hairs. She didn't respect you. As for Henry, that sneering asshole was holding you back. With him gone, your office is going to need to fill that job, right? A promotion would do you good, and boy, do you deserve it. This is crazy. This is all just... I mean, you killed a person." The man chuckled. "More than one person, Dan, much more. Come with me." Without waiting to see if I was behind him, my strange visitor walked out of my apartment. Feeling caught in his pull, I followed. The door to my neighbor's apartment was open. The scene inside reminded me of the time I saw a semi-truck run into an elk on the highway. Blood everywhere, soaked into the rug, dripping from the ceiling. What was left of my two neighbors was piled on the couch. The radio was broken in half. "Give me 6 months," the small man said. 6 months and I will help you get your life on track. No one will ever walk over you again, I promise. Or I can give you this computer back and you can return to being weak and scared." I thought about it for a long time, staring at the wet, red smears that used to be my obnoxious neighbors. My dad used to beat me with a belt whenever I got anything less than an A in school, I told the stranger. He never apologized. I haven't spoken to him in years. But I still know where he lives. The small man smiled. My son always detested dolls and plushies. Ever since he was an infant, I tried to buy him teddy bears and other fluffy creatures to keep him company at night, but he'd always end up tossing them aside, never to pick them up again. He was more of the morbid sorts, pulling toys apart to see which parts they were made from. It was a curious but partially concerning hobby, at least until I realized he'd do the exact same with walkie-talkies, radios, and old televisions. He was just curious as to how things worked, and he was damn good at it. It wasn't until October this year, a few weeks before Halloween, before that all changed. At 10 years of age, he ran up to me as we were shopping, pulled my arm, and begged for me to come with him. We entered a toy store covered in fake cobwebs and hundreds of scary, tiny costumes. But none of that seemed to interest him. All he wanted to show me was a large, used doll with red hair and eyes that could penetrate one's very soul. "I want him!" Alex called out as he jumped up and down in excitement. On the box there was just a name without a description. Chucky, an oddly eerie toy with an uncomfortable aura surrounding it. The thing didn't strike me as a children's toy at all, but Alex was adamant about the fact that he absolutely needed it. And since it was a heavily discounted used toy, I couldn't deny him the treat. Since he was a child that rarely asked for new toys, and one that did well at school, I thought he'd earn something new of his own. After all, I hadn't seen him that excited, well, ever. So, despite the steep price, I purchased the creepy doll, secretly hoping he'd grow tired of it and tear it apart like he did most devices. But that would not be the case. Over the next couple of weeks, Alex would take Chucky with him wherever he went. He'd pretend to feed him, have imaginary conversations with the thing, and even tuck it into bed next to him every night. He loved the damn thing, and nothing could separate the two. Still, I felt nervous whenever I saw the doll. Its eyes were weirdly expressive, filled with malice and designed in such a way that I could have sworn they were following me around the room wherever I went. It was a feeling I just couldn't shake, one that kept growing stronger for each day passing in October. During the night, I'd hear Alex chuckle as he held pretend conversations with Chucky. Most of the time, I'd just hear his voice. But on occasion, I almost imagined hearing a second voice, a dark whisper telling Alex stories I couldn't decipher. "Who were you talking to last night?" I asked, trying to seem calm. "Chucky, of course," Alex shouted excitedly. I let out a nervous chuckle. "Do you do his voice as well?" "No, he talks himself," Alex said back matter-of-factly. "What exactly does he say?" "He told me about his old friend." "Old friend?" "Yeah, where he used to live before. He didn't like him very much in the end. That's why he had to kill him." "Kill who?" "Chucky had to kill David Melford. He wasn't being nice to Chucky anymore." I was rendered speechless by that last sentence. While Alex had the morbid curiosity to take toys and devices apart to see how they worked, he had never once seemed violent, nor as much as mentioned death. "Chucky killed someone?" I asked with a shaky voice. "Only because he was mean. Chucky said I'd never be mean," Alex explained. After that, I sat Alex down and explained to him how serious these jokes were, that no one should mess around like that. Alex nodded along, shooting quick glances over at Chucky, who sat in a chair and seemed to observe the conversation. The creepy smile he had worn upon purchase seemed to have lessened, but I convinced myself I'd remembered his facial expression wrong. "Don't be mad at Chucky," Alex begged. "He doesn't like it when people are mad." The conversation didn't go much further, but the name Alex had mentioned, David Melford, stuck in my mind as something beyond a child's creative imagination. Once Alex had gone to bed, taking that creepy doll with him, I started looking up local news articles. The name wasn't all that uncommon, but one particular case stood out, a missing persons case about a 10-year-old child vanishing on Halloween a year prior, and a picture of him showing him holding onto a doll, exactly like Chucky. That's the moment I should have gotten rid of it, but my logical mind refused to give in to the idea that Chucky was anything more than what he appeared, a harmless doll. Instead of getting rid of him, I kept observing Alex playing and talking to him, praying he'd get tired of the doll and toss it away. But he didn't, and for each day ticking down towards Halloween, the more Chucky appeared to change. His eyes seemed more alive, and his unnaturally large smile had turned into a frown. While his face was made of malleable material, I couldn't rest easy knowing I was sharing a house with it. On the 26th of October, I was awoken in the middle of the night by Alex standing at my bedside. "Hey, Alex, what's going on?" "I can't sleep." "Chucky says you're mean, and he doesn't like mean people." "Chucky said I was mean? Why?" I asked, more annoyed than anything. "He says you looked at him strangely and want to get rid of him, and he says he won't go." I'm not sure if it was the lack of sleep or the dread of another workday coming up, but I'd had enough of the eeriness. "It's just a damn doll. Go back to bed, Alex. We'll talk about this tomorrow," I said sternly. He hesitantly returned to bed, but sleep would not come easily that night. I was thinking of ways to get rid of Chucky without upsetting Alex too much. I needed a good plan and a convincing lie, but for such an idea, I needed to sleep first. I'd awake the next morning to soaking wet bedsheets and air filled with a metallic tinge and rot. I almost threw up as I took my first morning breath. Once my eyes had adapted to the dim light, I realized that the liquid that was covering my bed was in fact blood. I jumped out from the bed in shock, desperately checking myself for wounds, but the blood wasn't mine. That's when I noticed the corpse of a stray cat lying at the foot of the bed, partially obscured by the duvet and covers, killed by multiple stab wounds. For a moment, I sat there in total panic, trying to figure out what had just happened, but my thoughts of worry quickly turned to concern for Alex. Whatever had killed the cat could have harmed my son. I jumped out of bed and rushed into his bedroom, still soaked in the stinking blood. There, Alex lay in a pool of the poor animal's blood as Chucky sat on his chair, clean as a whistle. At that moment, it all dawned on me that Alex was sick and in need of dire psychiatric help. My own son had killed the cat, and while Chucky was a creepy as hell doll, it wasn't dangerous, but rather a part of Alex's delusion. The rest of that day went by in a haze. We met up with a few doctors and psychologists who all recommended a short stay in a safe facility where he could be treated. All the while, Alex vehemently denied having killed the cat.
It was Chucky. He was angry,
he kept repeating with a shaky voice. I ignored his pleas for help and promised that he'd be taken care of by the doctors. He cried as I left him, but not out of fear. He was upset that Chucky couldn't come with him. As I arrived home alone, tears still lingering in my eyes from the ordeal, I found Chucky sitting on the floor of the entrance, almost awaiting my arrival. In a fury of blinding rage, I took the doll, wrapped it inside several bags to make sure I never had to lay eyes upon it again, and tossed it in the trash. I'd just have to wait for the next day and watch as the garbage truck passed by and removed him from my house forever. Alas, things would not be that simple. Because, as I awoke the next morning, I found the trash can toppled over and the bags torn open. Chucky was gone. For a moment, I just stood there and tried to convince myself that some neighbor kids had seen me throw the doll away and had taken it for themselves. But that theory would quickly be put to rest, as I went into my garage to find the entire place torn apart. Paint buckets had been destroyed, covering the entirety of the room in red paint, alongside debris from broken furniture. In the midst of it all sat Chucky. His smile had vanished from his face, replaced by a strong frown. In a rush of panic, I just grabbed him, took him into my house, lit up the fireplace, and threw him inside. His plastic body started to melt, and for each piece of his horrid body burning to a crisp, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Chucky was gone, and calmness once again occupied my home. Each day I went to visit Alex in the psychiatric facility. He'd stopped asking for Chucky. Instead, he'd come up with a new delusion.
It's okay. He's not angry at you anymore. Chucky said he will come and get me out of here soon.
Though the doctors said it was too early to tell, they comforted me, saying it's probably just an acute psychotic episode rather than schizophrenia, considering his age and all. But they needed me to be patient, because these things take time. He'll be home soon, the same boy as before. Don't worry about it, the doctor said reassuringly. And I believed him. I went home. I relaxed, knowing Alex was in good hands. Everything seemed fine until the 31st of October, the evening of Halloween, where I got a call from the psychiatric facility. A nervous-sounding doctor said that Alex had gone missing and that the police were out looking for him. Somehow, he'd managed to evade all the security cameras, and the only thing left behind was a trace of burned plastic and rubber, but no signs of an active fire. I don't know where Alex is, or if he's even still alive. All I know is that Chucky took him. Against all odds, his body had survived the fire, and he had taken Alex, just like he had the Melford kid, and who knows how many others before him. Melford had vanished on Halloween, just like Alex, and according to news reports going as far back as the 80s, more than a dozen kids have been taken, all on Halloween. I don't know if I'll see Alex ever again, but if you see a used Chucky doll next year around October, stay away from it. Please. I never found pride in my job, collecting ancient horrific items with dark backstories. Be it movie props, strange diaries, or even haunted dolls, I seek them out and add them to my ever-growing collection of the supernatural. I don't aim to make money from this, nor do I seek fame or glory. All I've ever wanted, is to prove the existence of something beyond our own reality. So, I've traveled to every haunted location on this planet and I've sought out any possibly possessed item, only to find myself empty-handed and disappointed time and time again. That would all change the moment I brought home a several decades-old doll I found buried in a few boxes in an abandoned house, left and forgotten by time itself. The house itself was actually my original destination. Allegedly, the previous owner was found murdered with his jaw physically torn apart from the rest of his head. A perpetrator was never found, but according to the autopsy report, the doctor adamantly insisted that the mortal wound was self-inflicted. Since then, the house has been abandoned, left alone to the point where the roof was collapsing in on itself. It was scheduled for demolition, but I had to get a closer look before the place was lost to history. And to my surprise, it hadn't yet been looted. Most of the place was covered by mold, dust, and peeling paint, sometimes all three at once. The previous owner must have been living quite frugally, because the place held nothing more than the bare necessities required to sustain life. It wasn't until I found the dangerously unstable attic before I finally hit the jackpot. A pile of boxes filled to the brim with various mementos, pictures, notebooks, and old toys. Most of the pictures were of dolls, and the notebooks were filled with handwritten texts describing the doll's behavior. Oddly enough, none of the depicted dolls could be found among the toys, as if they'd been removed after being photographed. All except for one red-haired doll with a thick face and massive eyes. Upon inspection, I realized just how dirty the doll was. Not only was it covered in dust, but specks of dark, red stains that resembled blood. On its back, it had a name tag sewn into the shirt that just read, Chucky. But whether it was the name of the doll or the owner, I couldn't tell. Not that any of that mattered. The mystery behind the dolls, the pictures, and the textbooks was all I wanted. So I grabbed as much as I could and added it all to my collection. As I got home, I started reading through the notebooks. I quickly realized that the man who'd written them wasn't much unlike myself. He had been collecting hundreds of supposedly haunted dolls and put them all through various tests to determine the validity of the claims. And the notebook described each of the tests. Julie, production year, 1954. Owner was a 5-year-old girl that died from an unexplained heart attack. Reported hearing strange sounds at night shortly after receiving the doll on her birthday. Doll remains unresponsive to all tests. Bobby, production year, 1966. Custom made for a baby boy, placed in the room as a symbolic guardian during the night. Ever since its placement, the baby hasn't stopped crying. It wasn't until the doll was moved for cleaning that the crying stopped. During that time, the mother reported hearing whispers over the baby monitor. Doll remains unresponsive to all tests. Every single one of the entries ended with that same sentence. Doll remains unresponsive to all tests. All except for the last entry, Chucky's entry. Chucky, production year, unknown. Doll discovered at a yard sale, allegedly a part of a mass production line of similar battery-powered dolls. Despite the rumors, no copies of the doll have been found. Chucky's history remains a mystery, but his worn-out appearance indicates previous ownership. His eyes seem to follow me as I walk around the room. The battery compartment remains empty, indicating a possible optical illusion. Update, October 3rd, 1992. Chucky started becoming more active during the first days of the month. He keeps appearing in random rooms without me moving him. I've never been one to sleepwalk. I'll try locking him up tonight. Update, October 15th, 1992. I woke up to minor cuts on my arms. Chucky was in my room. Did he hurt me? Update, October 23rd, 1992. I keep hearing him whisper. I can't understand what he's saying, but I know it's time. Update, October 30th, 1992. Chucky sat at my bed. He carved letters into my chest. I can't block out his voice anymore. He says that I'll be dead on Halloween. I need to get rid of him. That was the last entry. The book was either a hoax or exactly what I'd been looking for. I did a basic inspection, checking for any power source of post-production modification. His eyes did indeed seem to follow me as I moved around, and the crimson spots were definitely not a part of its original design. Another thing that sent chills down my spine was his facial expression. At the time of discovery, he'd worn a more neutral look, but as I inspected him, he was smiling. But apart from these initial creepy findings, I couldn't confirm any real supernatural aspect. But I'd just gotten the thing, and it was getting late, so I locked him up securely within one of my safes and went to bed for the night. I don't know whether it came from excitement or if something had changed within my home, but that night, sleep would not come easy. I kept lingering on the brink of sleeping, existing somewhere between the waking world and dreams. Each time I felt myself fade away into unconsciousness, I could have sworn I heard a whisper pull me back to reality. "Come and play," it said. The first few times I shot up in bed and searched the entire room for any kind of intruder. I checked my phone and computer multiple times to check if anything had accidentally started playing. And the third time I heard the whispers, I went to check on Chucky, who was still safely locked away. By the time morning came around, I'd only gotten a couple of hours of proper shut-eye, and though I wanted nothing more than to investigate the supernatural aspects of Chucky, I had to work until nightfall. As I sat in the office that day, I kept thinking back to the whispers. They had to have been a part of my overtired mind, a waking dream, but the idea alone still sent shivers down my spine. By the time day had given way to night, I arrived home half asleep. My body yearned for a good night's sleep, but I had to work with Chucky. I decided to start with the basics, testing the doll's response to various stimuli. I tried out electricity, sound, impacts, heat, cold, and measured any kind of radioactivity. Nothing. Based on the preliminary findings, Chucky was nothing more than a normal doll. Yet his eyes would not stop following me around the room, and his smile seemed to have gotten wider. I wanted to do more tests, but my eyes were getting heavy, and I was struggling to stay awake. I left my workbench, forgetting to put Chucky back into the safe, and stumbled into bed, instantly falling asleep. My dreams were uneasy that night, filled with the whispers and faint laughter, never letting me truly rest.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
A voice whispered with intermittent chuckles. A strange burning sensation started crawling up my arms, like lines of fire climbing towards my neck. It started as a light tingle, but quickly turned to unbearable warmth that inevitably caused me to wake up in panic. I shot up in bed, my eyes quickly adapting to the dark, and what I saw sent a huge surge of adrenaline rushing through my body. Chucky was sitting at the foot of my bed, staring at me with his usual uncanny smile. Only then did I notice how warm and wet my arms felt. I glanced down at them, only to find streaks of fresh blood pouring down from dozens of deep cuts on my arms. In my right hand, I held a bloodied knife, most likely the source of my cuts.
From now on, no more Mr. Good Guy.
I heard Chucky whisper without moving his mouth. I jumped out of bed, which shook it enough to send Chucky pummeling to the ground, dropping his knife. Once again, he seemed to have turned into an inanimate object. I was safe. That event was enough to convince me of the supernatural, but I wasn't stupid enough to continue playing with my own life. I took the doll out into my backyard and tossed it into the woodcutter. I heard a sickly scream as the machine cut him into pieces and spat out pieces of plastic on the other end. With that, I let out a sigh of relief and went to the hospital for treatment. None of the cuts were too deep and resembled self-harm wounds more than intentionally damaging ones. Of course, I couldn't tell the doctors the truth, so I listened to them preach about mental health as they sent me home. Exhausted, I just lay in bed all day watching movies, trying to keep my mind off what I'd just experienced. The distraction paid off, because at some point in the evening, I just dozed off, falling into a dreamless sleep. Alas, the rest would not last long. I was awoken around midnight to a burning pain in my hand. I shot up in bed and screamed as I realized someone had just cut my middle finger off. In the corner of my room sat Chucky, with a pair of bloodied garden shears, smiling at my suffering. What the fuck?
Yeah, life sure is full of surprises.
Chucky didn't even try to fight back as I grabbed him. That time I burned him in the yard, staring at his melting body before frantically searching for my finger, which was nowhere to be found. Only once I'd confirmed that his body had burned away did I return to the hospital for treatment. That time I had a few days of uncomfortable silence as I wondered whether Chucky would return. A question that would be brutally answered as I woke up with the skin flayed off my leg, and Chucky sitting next to me on the bed. I almost died that night due to blood loss, and he'd managed to damage some of the nerves in my leg, leaving me with a permanent limp. And again, I was stupid enough to try to get rid of him. I figured destroying him couldn't work, so instead I dug a hole in the ground, tossed him in, and filled it with cement. He'd be intact, but trapped within the block of concrete. But he'd return with a vengeance not 3 days later, where I woke up to him pushing a knife into my right eye, pulling it out as he removed the knife from my now empty socket.
Oops, I did it again.
What the hell do you want from me? I cried.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
As usual, he never resisted when I fought back. He let me push him away, and he didn't attack as I called an ambulance. Except that time, I was planning on coming home. After several visits in the month of October, several of the doctors believed I was suffering from some sort of mental disorder, and I didn't disagree. On the 29th of October, I was sent to a local psychiatric facility. They kept me locked away from the rest of mankind, making sure I didn't harm myself. Though I knew I wasn't crazy, I figured being locked in meant Chucky would be locked out. For the next couple of days, I believed I was safe. But on October 30th, the whisper began again.
Hi, I'm Chucky, and I'm your friend to the end.
Chucky said in the dead of night. "Leave me alone," I cried.
Hi-ho.
He whispered back. Today is Halloween, the day the previous owner allegedly died. I've tried to warn the staff here, but they just upped my dosage of antipsychotics. I am going to die tonight, and there's nothing in this world that can save me. So I'm writing this last letter as a warning. Don't try to prove the existence of something supernatural. And if you ever see a Chucky doll for sale, ignore it.
Matt, do you hear that? Someone's knocking at the door. I sat up in bed and checked the watch on my dresser. 2:15. The wind has a way of making the most innocent sounds suspicious. A tapping at the window could be nothing more than an exposed branch. A scraping in the ceiling could be something stuck on the roof. A pounding at the door, well, that could mean any number of things. Busted pipes, expanding air ducts, even something as innocent as a front door ornament getting a little too ornery. We've had that one happen before. But as I listened for traces of movement in the night, I knew my wife had to be right. 3 dramatically clear knocks again echoed down the hallway of our small home. What do they want? Who is it? It's 2 in the friggin' morning, Em whispered. I hopped out of bed and threw on some basketball shorts in the dark. The lights were out. I flicked the switch by my nightstand a few times and nothing responded. I grunted and then yelled a bit after stepping on a cat toy. Em scolded me for that. Quiet! Now he knows we're home. 3 more consistent knocks seemed to confirm her theory. How do you know it's a he? I whispered with a silent smile. It was a shameless little game I played to make her scared. We had been through this routine fairly often in the past few weeks. Em was always hearing things in the night, ever since we moved. And I was always the investigator, with my trusty Louisville slugger from high school by my side. I never found anything, but my looking always made her feel better. Our new house in the country tended to set my wife on edge a bit. 3 more knocks. They sounded hurried now. I stumbled into the living room, still aching from my bumped toe, and reached for the trusty Louisville waiting in its spot behind the couch. The knocks began to lose all rhythm at all. The owner pounded the door anxiously, apparently losing patience, before his angry footsteps retreated down the porch. I waited a moment, then I opened the door. The storm had added several inches of snow overnight, and the wind pushed it right into my face. We had heard about horrible traffic on the parkway. Commuters had been stuck for hours. People had actually abandoned their cars, instead opting to walk home and get them later. The local road that led to my house was itself left unblemished by plows or tires. Only a single pair of footprints led from the highway a few miles away all the way to our front door. Standing at the end of them and at the bottom of my front steps was an ordinary-looking man. I couldn't see most of his features at first. He wore a heavy black parka with a dorky feathered hood on top, shielding his head from the wind. Dark snow pants almost covered a pair of pristine tan Timberland-like boots. Something about the outfit looked familiar. The man appeared ready to give up and go away as he fumbled for something in his pockets. But I called out to him. I don't know why. Maybe I felt more confident with the bat by my side. "Can I help you?" The stranger turned at once in relief. He looked to be middle-aged. Dark black hair peeked out through the hood and dangled in front of cool blue eyes. He hopped up the steps immediately and reached out confidently to shake my hand. When he spoke, his voice sounded oddly high-pitched. His breath and coat stunk of some unfamiliar type of old man cologne.
"Oh, thank God. Thank God for the Good Samaritan. Sir, my car broke down on the highway a few miles from here. The engine is dead. My cell phone is out of battery. Fucking technology, right? I'm from out of town and I don't know my ass from a back road out here. I know it's late and I know how this must look, but would you mind if I stepped inside and used your phone?"
I looked the man up and down uneasily. He seemed harmless enough, but if my older brother taught me one thing, it's don't trust a strange man in your house after hours. I tried to think of a way to let the stranger down easy. Instead, I opted for the truth. "Our phone's dead. The power's out here. Sorry about that." He looked wounded, and that definitely stung my conscience a bit. He turned to stare helplessly back at the acres of empty, untouched snow before him. 7 or 8 inches had stacked up in some places. The plows were nowhere to be seen. The town was almost always woefully unprepared for unexpected storms. The man's lack of options quickly became apparent.
"Okay, guess I better get walking."
I felt a brush of satin before my wife appeared by my side.
"You could stay here a bit, sir, until the power comes back?"
I pushed the door back a bit and whispered angrily to Emily, "What are you doing? We don't know this man."
"So what? He's stuck. It's all over Facebook. The highway is still backed up. This is something my dad would do. Sneak out of the house during a storm for some fast food or something. Plus, you heard him. We're the Good Samaritans, just like the Bible."
Great. Somebody started to take church a little too seriously. I tried to disguise my groan before throwing the door back open. "So how about it? You can sleep on the couch until morning if you like." The man nodded graciously and pushed himself past me. He immediately began pulling off his waterlogged clothing in our hallway. Upon closer inspection, all of it appeared to be about 3 sizes too small. I thought nothing of it at the time.
"I will go throw this in the dryer," Emily offered. "I'll run it when the power comes back."
She disappeared down the stairs as the man made himself comfortable on my couch. He pulled out an old cell phone and stared down in surprise.
"Got a towel?"
he asked me, pointing to the sopping mess accumulating on our wood floors.
"Or some clothes?"
I ran into the bathroom to search the closet for spare towels. Something about the man's arrogance annoyed me. Here we were, allowing him into our home in the middle of the night without suspicion, and he was already barking orders. I found an old rag buried under a basket filled with mascara and pulled it loose. When I came back outside, the stranger had stretched his long legs fully out on our couch.
"You know, that's a pretty sweet wife you've got there," he giggled as I wiped up the mess. "Pretty sweet indeed. Wish I had one that sweet."
The words made my skin crawl. Emily waltzed up from the basement in a hurry and smiled happily to both of us in the living room.
"Sorry about that. Hopefully the power comes back soon."
I wanted to say something to her, but not in front of the creep. He stared at her like a dog eyeing a brand new bone. I suddenly noticed the shorts she was wearing. I noticed the lack of a bra. We were just in bed after all, and the stranger seemed to notice too.
"Say, honey, do you work out a lot?" he asked.
My wife blushed and covered herself apologetically. She always looked for the best in people, and she had heard her fair share of inappropriate jokes in the day.
"Oh, I should put something on. Excuse me."
I moved to follow her into the bedroom as a familiar jingle danced its way towards the couch.
Oh, look at that. You've got yourself a fat cat.
My tuxedo kitten, Figaro, hopped happily onto the couch and into the man's outstretched arms. He purred at the attention from such a new and strange company. The man happily allowed his face to be licked and pawed. He reached out and snatched Fig up in his burly arms. Yeah, he's a good boy, I explained awkwardly. Loves attention. The man smiled a toothy grin in my direction as he offered generous pecks to Figaro's confused forehead.
Oh, they all do. They all do. You know, they say cats are one of the only animals to prefer human interaction to food. They tested it in a lab somewhere. Fuck if I know. But trust of a man is built into most house cats' basic instincts. Through years of selective breeding, most of these things trust us implicitly. Isn't that something?
I nodded and said nothing. Something about the way he squeezed Figaro closer to him made me uncomfortable.
You know, I could snap this little shit's neck right now, and he'd let me do it.
That did it. I'm sorry if this is rude, but I think you should leave. The stranger blinked. The atmosphere in my living room changed in an instant. A moment's hesitation caused Figaro to hiss and jump through his weakened grip. The ringing bell disappeared down the stairs.
Well, doesn't seem very Christian of you.
I grabbed the bat, still resting up against my front door. Yeah, well, we're Catholic. My wife called out from the bedroom.
Matt, is everything all right?
I shouted my reply without ever taking my eyes off the stranger in front of me. Stay in the bedroom and lock the door. He got to his feet lazily. He was smiling, like the threat of me holding a bat amused him. Maybe that wasn't such a bad assertion. At his full height, the stranger stood well over 6 feet tall and easily dwarfed my scrawny 5'10".
Yes, Emily, stay in bed. I'll be done with your husband shortly.
He advanced in a flash, and so I swung the bat like it was an instinct of my own. My brother always told me, if you get in a fight with a bigger man, aim for his knees. And so I did exactly that. I leaned the small cylinder of metal directly across the stranger's kneecaps like my life depended on it. I think it did. The stranger's knees shattered like a piece of glass. Emily later said she could hear the impact from our bedroom. My next blow went to his face. A double tap, if you will. I grabbed the jerk by his collar and immediately dragged him the fuck out of my house. I left him by the foot of our porch and locked the door. I joined Emily in the additionally locked bedroom as she frantically described our situation to dispatch on her now working cell phone. Officers were making their way towards our house, but the snow impeded their travel. We heard someone dragging themselves up the steps. We heard him try to jimmy the door handle. After several unsuccessful attempts, he screamed at us through the night, then went quiet. I stood with my bat against the shoulder and waited for him to come back. You might think I overreacted. I assure you I didn't. Police officers swarmed my house approximately an hour later. They found the stranger unconscious by the front porch of our home. We described the entire situation to the detectives exactly as I have here, word for word. The man was arrested and processed accordingly. A few hours later, additional officers were sent to check in on my neighbors. It was a routine activity. They just wanted to see if they could garner more witnesses. What they found precluded that necessity. The stranger made a previous stop that night. 2 miles down the road sat a nice family, husband, wife, 2 young daughters around my sister's age. One of them worked at a local coffee shop. We had met her a handful of times. The other was studying for grad school. They were murdered inside their own home. Every single one of them. Mom, dad, and daughters. The stranger left 4 bodies, untouched, sitting and waiting by the front door. The only items missing from the household were one of the daughter's snow clothes.
Welcome to Kickin' Chicken. Can I interest you in the number 5 on this fine evening?
Repeat that phrase to yourself once. Now repeat it again, on average 80 times in 8 hours. Such was my shitty, stifling, robotic life. I started my shift out here in the sticks at 11 p.m. each night. It ended at 7. The hours alone were tough to manage. After a few months, the stress of rough hours, unruly college kids, and minimum wage work caused pure anxiety that seeped into my days off. My classwork was bombing, my bills were stacked, and for some reason, I still refused to quit that shitty job in Hackensack. The reason was actually pretty clear. Its name was Arabella, and I was intoxicated. My first shift on the job, we brushed up against each other accidentally behind the serving counter. Her leather jacket, tossed ironically over her kickin' uniform, felt smooth along my skin. Her jet black hair shined and smelled like cinnamon mixed with strawberry at the same time. The overwhelming dose of perfume commingled with the shampoo to create a heavenly smell laced with a tiny bit of alcohol. I was 18 after all. It only took one shy smile over a 6-hour shift for that girl to become my primary objective in life. I checked the schedule incessantly to see if we were working together. But for the first few weeks after our original run-in, we were on different shifts. Then finally, to my luck and surprise, one winter evening, the tables finally turned. That night was a blizzard. I arrived early to find Arabella operating the store on her own. Apparently, my normal companions had called out sick, and our boss had asked her to work a double shift. I didn't have a lot of questions. Honestly, I was too excited at the prospect of my shameless flirting through the morning. But nothing happened. Arabella manned the fryers while I took orders. The hours crept by as we watched snow stack up in layers of white outside the sliding glass window. Our manager Dolores had hired a plow to maintain the drive-thru, but even still, not many folks had the courage to come through. After 2, there were only a few cars left on the highway at all. I awkwardly used the time to run my best lines past Arabella. "Where do you go to school? Do you live nearby? Did you grow up here?" She nodded and mumbled a couple half-hearted replies. Every 5 minutes, she would run out into the snow with her phone, leaving me alone. I assumed she was smoking a cigarette or was just catching some fresh air. Or maybe she was bothered by her creepy coworker, me, that would not leave her alone. Eventually, I cut off the flirting and got back to work. And yet, around 3:30 a.m., we finally found something to bond over. A repeat customer. As soon as I uttered my catchphrase, "Welcome to Kickin' Chicken. Can I interest you in the number 5 this fine evening?" I recognized the voice on the other side.
"Yeah, let me get a number 5 with a cup of water. And some ice, please, if you don't mind."
Same order, same exact words. His face was not memorable, but that voice had just pulled through an hour ago. A cup of ice is an odd enough request to remember. Whatever. I ignored any suspicion and rang him up. The last thing you're supposed to do at a fast food joint is question the size of somebody's dinner. "You got it, sir. Total will be $8.33, next window."
"Is the ice free?" he asked.
"Yes, sir," I replied, aware that I was repeating myself. I turned to Arabella, who was staring at me with an inquisitive look. Her green eyes grew wide as I mouthed, "Same guy." I punched the order into the machine. Suddenly, she was super talkative. "What do you think he wants? What does he look like? Good thing we have some left." I mumbled my own replies. I was surprised that she seemed so worried. So what if it was the same guy? Maybe he was just hungry. Maybe he was out plowing the roads. Who cared? After scrambling somewhere in the back corner of the kitchen, Arabella fired up the fryer and started to cook the man's meal. I walked to the window and assured the man in the SUV that it would take a couple minutes to cook. His appearance was truly unremarkable. He had brown hair, brown eyes, glasses, and light skin. The baseball cap on his head suggested he was a Mets fan, and the sticker on his bumper said he had kids. I asked about both casually. The conversation was common and cordial enough until Arabella arrived at the sliding window with his order.
"Oh, well, you're the only one back there making this delicious chicken?"
the man asked flirtatiously. I felt my face flush a violently angry red. She smiled and nodded shyly. He chuckled his reply.
Well, don't go anywhere. I might come back for more of your cooking, cutie.
We all laughed and waved awkwardly as he took his food and drove off the ramp. For the next half hour, the man sat in his car in the front of the store and enjoyed his meal. I thought nothing of it. Arabella was a lot more worried.
Don't you wish you would just leave us alone?
She said in a mouse-like tone as she drifted over and curled under my sweatshirt worriedly. I welcomed the contact. The smell of shampoo was replaced by menthol cigarettes and something else.
Do you think he will come back?
She asked in a whisper. Then she giggled.
Let's lock him out.
Arabella strode over to the entrance and locked the doors as if it were closing time. She also turned off the drive-through light. Then she strode towards me with crystal green eyes lighting up the dine-in lobby. She shimmied a bit and let the leather jacket fall from her shoulders to the unclean tile floor. For half a minute, I forgot where I was. Right up until Arabella stuck a 4-inch knife into my gut.
Dolores was a little dry, she said as she stabbed me again. But I'm so glad to have a fan. Let's get it right this time.
She aimed the blade at my leg, probably hoping to nick an artery.
This will make a much bigger mess. But hey, he's gotta have his meat.
The blood loss made me woozy. I was aware of the glass shattering. I can remember the ricochet of bullets, but the most unforgettable thing was the look on her face when she took several of the bullets in the side and died. Arabella was still smiling. A shadow in a Mets hat carried my body out into the snow. Unbeknownst to me, our manager had disappeared that afternoon after an argument with an employee. Her wife had called several times looking for her, but the calm, confident voice at our restaurant, Arabella, told the woman that our boss had not even bothered to show up that day. She knew that was a lie. After a few hours, an officer was sent to investigate, but the man thought he'd ordered some food first. He was shocked by what he found. Arabella had cut Dolores into pieces in her large white van outside. She then popped those portions into the fryer, mixed them with the chicken, and handed them off to me as part of the number 5. In total, we served 7 different customers human remains. The officer never ate any. He only ordered multiple to confirm his suspicion. Kickin' Chicken closed indefinitely after the incident. The entire store was investigated. I was never charged with a crime, mostly because I cooperated with the investigators every time they asked. I avoid fast food now, even if there's nothing else open on my street. And this is the reason. You never know what's in your meat. Missing twin. Have you seen him? Cash reward. Do not contact me with unsolicited services or offers. I have a hobby of skimming Craigslist while drunk. Most of the time I'll stick to discussion posts for my area. Sometimes I'll check out gigs or for sale, but my favorite category was lost and found. You can learn a lot about your neighbors based on the things they lose and how hard they try to get these things back. I've seen weird posts before. Lost refrigerator, crystal skull, once even a missing prosthetic leg. But missing twin was a horse of a whole different flavor, and it was so casual. There was already a hangover headed my way, so I figured another beer or two wouldn't add much to the damage. At that point, I was already roaring drunk, teetering right on the edge of a blackout, but not quite there yet. After another beer, I made a mistake that ended up costing me a lot. I replied to the Craigslist ad. Hi, I think I might be your missing twin. How are things? I'm not sure why I sent that. I remember being bored, fuzzy, and curious. I also remember being so close to closing my laptop and calling it a night. Then the owner of the Craigslist ad replied almost immediately. I missed you. Oh, we've got a live one, I slurred, opening another beer. That was the drink that sent me over the hammered but aware cliff, plummeting down into Wasted Valley. I woke up the next morning with a headache like somebody opened a strip mine behind my eyeballs. There were 26 unread emails in my inbox. I took a leak, then returned to my living room, still in my underwear, and plopped down on the couch with my computer. Heavy curtains kept out painful sunshine. The only light came from the blue glow of my laptop screen. It wasn't even bright enough to reveal the bottles and clothes and Chinese takeout boxes scattered around my apartment. I opened the first email. "Twin, where did you go?" I opened another email, then another. All were from the Craigslist poster, and all were some variation of asking me where I went. For some reason, I felt compelled to open all of them. The last message was a single word. Meet? I closed the laptop and rubbed my temple. My hangover was shifting into high gear. So a rando on Craigslist had my email. Not the end of the world, though my full name was part of the email address. It was a common name, and I lived in a big city. I should be safe. That's what I kept telling myself all day as I laid curled on the couch. I ordered tacos from DoorDash. I slept. When I checked my computer again, there were another 8 messages. I decided to retire the email address and close the account. I figured the Craigslister was just an oddball. Harmless. It was back to the usual routine after that. My hangover was barely a greasy echo by the time I went to work the following day. Riding on the subway that morning, a strange sensation. Little hairs prickling on the back of my neck. Someone was watching me. I scanned the crowded subway car, but didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. The sensation of being watched stuck with me until I reached my stop. Then, in a blink, it was gone. Yet the memory lingered with me all through the morning as I sat in my cubicle. I was distracted, unable to work, staring at a blank spreadsheet for an hour. Somehow I made it to lunch. I bolted from the office like a raccoon from a burning dumpster. The moment I left the building, I felt the sensation again. My watcher. I hurried through the city, dodging people on the sidewalk. When there was a gap in the press, I turned to see if I was being followed. A man was standing in the middle of the road, blocking traffic. He was too far away to see clearly, though there was something familiar about him. Cars were honking, but he stood scarecrow still. Then he waved. No matter how many turns I took or intersections I sprinted through, the feeling clung to me. Eventually, I ducked into a grimy pub, nearly slipping on a puddle of unidentified liquid at the door. It was dark in the room. I slid into a corner booth, keeping my eye on the entrance. My hands were shaking. For the first time in my life, I felt hunted. After a few minutes of watching the door without anyone coming in, I let out a breath and slouched into the booth. Maybe I'd lost my watcher. The relief lasted about 20 seconds. That's when I noticed the man leaning against the bar. He was staring at me, smiling. I didn't recognize him at all, and he had a face I'd remember. Watery eyes, a broken nose badly set, and teeth like little gravestones. I realized why he seemed familiar. The stranger was dressed exactly like me. Exactly. Same tan chinos, same blue button-down shirt, same haircut. It was like looking at my reflection in a funhouse mirror. When the man saw I was aware, he picked up 2 beers from the bar, walked over and sat down opposite me in the booth.
"Finally found you,"
he said, voice higher than I expected. "Do I know you?" I was weighing my options, wondering if I should bolt to the door.
"Such a joker,"
the stranger said, letting out a little chuckle.
"You've been a bad twin. I miss you."
I leaned back. "Dude, I have no idea who you are." The stranger looked down at the table.
"I know this is unusual. I apologize. My brother. He passed away a few years back. It really left a hole. You know how they say twins have an extra bond, that they can sense each other. With him gone, that feeling I had my whole life just faded out. Imagine looking up at the sky every night, and all of a sudden there are no more stars, and never will be again.
I don't know what to say.
This isn't your problem. I'm sure I'm freaking you out. You see, I post those ads as a coping mechanism. Sometimes people play along, and for a moment it's like he's back. That's all I thought this was, but I can see I've upset you. I apologize.
The stranger blinked his wet blue eyes and nodded to himself. I was at a bit of a loss. I think maybe this is a misunderstanding, I offered. I shouldn't have replied to your ad.
I came on strong. How about one beer, we part ways, and I won't bother you again?
Some part of my brain, an old part that developed long ago when we still had to watch the tall grass for hungry eyes, it was warning me to leave. But I was so relieved to find out that my watcher was a sad man, not some monster. What was the harm in one drink? I woke up with my cheek pressed against cold concrete. This was the grandmother of all hangovers. I wanted to touch my head to cheek for a buried axe, but my hands are stuck, tied behind my back. I was laying on the floor in the dark.
We don't really look much alike,
a voice whispered from somewhere nearby.
I was awfully depressed to see that. Not twins at all. Not yet.
What the shit? I mumbled, face a little numb. There was the pop of a light bulb. In the yellow-orange glow, I saw I was in an empty storage unit, the type you'd rent to fill with boxes of junk and old furniture. There were mattresses duct taped to the walls. The stranger from the bar was standing over me, light caught on the edge of the straight razor he was unfolding. We were still dressed the same. He leaned down.
If I can't look like you, little twin, maybe we can change things. Rearrange. Trim.
I remember screaming for a long time. The mattresses. They must have been good soundproofing. No one came looking, no matter how loud I shrieked. The pain was everywhere. It started at my face, but it lit up every nerve. A scalding electric field that left me shaking. I've never tasted so much blood. My last memory inside the storage unit was the stranger sitting down at my feet. He was crying.
Not good enough. Not even close.
Another blackout washed over me, and I prayed I wouldn't wake up, that it would be over. This time, when I opened my eyes, I saw a white light. Then a shadow leaned down. I would have screamed if my mouth wasn't full of something soft and dry. "Still with us?" a voice asked. I mumbled. "Don't try talking," the voice continued. "Your mouth, your tongue, there's some damage, but you're safe now. You're in the hospital." I reached for my face. Cotton bandages covered everything from my neck to my scalp. They were wet, my fingers sticking briefly before I pulled them away. I'm still not sure why the stranger stopped cutting me. Maybe he wasn't seeing whatever he hoped to find, so he dumped me outside an ER and disappeared. The doctors tell me I have options. Reconstructive surgery is always evolving, they say, always improving. With time and luck, I might be able to get about 75% back to normal. Maybe even 80%. I still don't look when they change the bandages. Eventually, I'll have to. For the time being, I like to distract myself. They lent me a laptop, and I've been trying to write, keeping a journal. I'm not sure why I checked Craigslist this morning, but I felt drawn to it. The post was only a few hours old. The location had shifted from downtown to the north side of the city, but the wording was horribly familiar. Missing twin. Have you seen him? Cash reward. Do not contact me with unsolicited services or offers. Last year in November, my house was broken into and robbed. I came home to find that someone had hammered the lock from my front door. My house looked like a bomb had gone off. Cabinets were open or broken, clothes were on the floor, there were even a few holes in the drywall. All of my electronics were missing. My PC, my consoles, the TV, and my brand new speakers. The pricks even stole my cheap homemade coffee table. It was barely more than plywood and scrap lumber I'd put together and painted red, but it was mine, damn it. I did my best to clean up while taking pictures of everything for the police report. The creeps had used my bathroom and didn't even flush. It felt so petty. Is there anyone you know of that would want to target you? The officer asked when I called the station. No, I don't really have any enemies. I heard the lady pop her gum. I'll be honest with you. We can open a report, but the chance of us finding the suspects without something more concrete to go on is maybe 15%. You don't happen to have any cameras in your home, do you? Or one of those video doorbells that might have caught something? No. The cop sighed. Okay, maybe we'll get lucky. I was feeling deflated after my conversation with the police. It looked like I was not likely to recover any of my property, so my only option was to replace it. The next few hours dragged. No TV, no games, and I could only surf the web on my phone for so long before becoming cripplingly bored. I needed something back, so I went on Craigslist and searched for speakers. Those at least I could replace with limited funds. Luck finally seemed to be breaking my way. The first listing I found for speakers near me was perfect. They were cheap, close by, and the same model that I'd lost. When I contacted the seller, he messaged me back saying that he could make the exchange tonight if I hurried over. Since I was eager to get out of the house, I was happy to head out. After more than an hour of driving, I finally came upon a dirt road that led back to an old hunting cabin. It was a squat white building, or it used to be white. Time and weather had stripped most of the paint down to the wood. Vines grew along one side of the house, crawling up the wall like a green web. I considered turning the car around, but I'd already made the trip, so I figured I might as well see if I could pick up the speakers. The man who answered the door looked like what you get if you made a human out of denim and cigarette ash and cursed it with life. You the guy? The owner of the cabin asked, standing in the doorway, shirtless. He was older, maybe 60, with gray matted hair and a salt and pepper beard. Tall and lanky, the man's voice was so rough, I could practically see the words scraping his teeth on the way out. Hey, hi, I said. I contacted you on Craigslist about the speakers. The man spit something into the bush near his porch. He didn't say anything else, just nodded for me to follow him. The cabin was even less appealing on the inside. Musty furniture with moth-eaten cushions filled up most of the main room. Stacks of cardboard boxes stood like towers leaning against the walls. The floor was partially carpeted, speckled with spots of bare wood. I'm in the back, the man muttered, pushing through a ratty curtain. I followed. The cabin smelled like mildew and stale air. The back room was even more crowded than the first. Containers were everywhere, piles of toys and power tools and some items still in the packaging. And there were guns. Lots of guns. Guns on the wall, guns in cases, a few just lying out. I was so busy staring at the madness around me that I banged my shin into a small table. The old man was rummaging around in the corner. He stood up while I was rubbing my leg and held out a small speaker. $30, he said. The ad listed it for $25. Processing fee. Okay, I said, reaching for my wallet. My hand froze. The speaker didn't just look similar to the one I'd lost. It was identical, even down to the slight scuff mark on the top from where I'd dropped it weeks ago. I glanced down at the table I'd just bumped into. It was small, crude, red. It was my table. Something wrong? The man asked. Where did you get all this stuff? That's not your business. I pointed at the speaker. It might not be my business, but it is my damn property. It was stolen from my house. The man set the speaker down. Are you calling me a thief? I shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe you bought it from a thief. Either way, it's stolen property. So's the table. Shit, I bet a bunch of my stuff is in here. Get out of my house, the man hissed. Not until... The old man reached into his pocket and pulled out a large folding knife. It clicked open with a twitch of his wrist. I quickly backed out of the house. The man followed me, knife held a little above his waist, his eyes never leaving mine. If I ever see you again, I'm gonna stick this knife in your belly button and open you up like an envelope, the man said. You're fucking nuts. He spat. Calling me a thief, you dirty roach. I've never driven as fast as I did that night leaving the cabin. When I got home, I tried to lock and bolt the door, only to remember that the lock was destroyed in the break-in. I ended up pushing the couch against the door. I reported the incident to the cops immediately after. 2 officers had gone over to the cabin, but no one answered the door when they knocked. They didn't have a warrant or probable cause, so the best they could do was promise to come back in the morning. That night I retired to bed feeling disappointed but couldn't sleep. I was frustrated. A couple hours had passed and I was there, still awake, when I heard strange noises at the front door. My couch wasn't large and the scraping noise told me it was starting to move. Somebody was pushing their way inside. There was an oak tree in my yard that grew close to my house. I opened my bedroom window and climbed down the tree. I managed to half run, half creep to my neighbor Benny's house. Benny looked surprised when he opened the door, but let me in. I told him about the break-in and my fear that someone was waiting for me back home. We called the police, turned off the lights, and waited. A single cruiser pulled up in front of my house 5 minutes later. Benny came with me as I approached the squad car. 2 young police officers got out and the 4 of us walked down the driveway to my house. While searching the house, one of the officers noticed dirt marks that led directly to my bedroom. He followed it, and hiding under my bed, laying on his stomach and tightly gripping a small bag, was an old man. Yes, it was the same old man that posted the Craigslist ad. I found out later that inside the bag was a 9mm pistol. The creepy old shit literally came back to kill me, apparently. They managed to recover all of my property from the man's cabin. Police also found thousands of dollars of stolen goods from other robberies. Apparently, the Craigslist seller was running a ring, listing items that he took during burglaries. My discovery threatened his whole operation, so he came after me. To this day, I'm so thankful that I stayed alert that night. If I hadn't thought to barricade the front door, or if I hadn't followed my instincts and left the house when I did, who knows what would have happened to me.
A few years ago, I was working as a healthcare assistant at the hospital, and recently having moved out of my dad's home, I had started renting a small, detached home in the countryside. I had one neighbor on this street, a man in his late 30s who I will call Jake. He was single and lived alone. My first encounter with Jake was when I was moving in. My dad couldn't accompany me on my first day of moving in due to his work schedule, so I was unpacking by myself. Jake walked up to me, introduced himself, and offered to help with moving my heavy items. I'm a very small woman, so I appreciated the help. My first impressions were that he was very kind, open, and polite. He chatted to me about his job, told me that he liked to play instruments and write in his spare time. We bonded over both loving the band Tool, and we both enjoyed playing the bass. The next day, I brought him some beer as a thank you. He wasn't in, however, so I left it by his front door and included a thank you note for all the previous help the day prior. Over the next few weeks as I settled in, Jake would pop by. We'd chat about music, discuss shared hobbies, drink beer, and occasionally even watch movies together. I was new to the area and didn't have many friends yet, so we helped provide some social interaction outside of my job. But, as you can already tell, things didn't stay so good. I got home one evening to see a basket full of flowers on my doorstep and an included card which read that this was from Jake, and he wanted to speak with me when I had the time. I walked inside with the basket. I didn't even get a chance to put it down before I heard knocking at my door. It was around 11 p.m. and I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the window next to the door to see Jake waving at me. I opened the door and that's the first time I can recall where I started to feel uneasy around him. He asked if I saw the basket and if I liked it. He asked to come in, but I said something along the lines of how tired I am after work and that we should speak tomorrow. He didn't say anything for a few seconds before he asked if I wanted to grab a coffee with him before work tomorrow. I said sure and closed the door. The next morning, we grabbed coffee at a Costa that was close to the hospital I worked at. He seemed very excited and giddy. Soon after, he asked me to be his girlfriend. I had to decline as we had only known each other for a few weeks and, well, he was significantly older than me. He suddenly dropped his cheery demeanor, as if he had become someone else in the matter of seconds. He grabbed his things and left, saying only that he has to go to work. I went to work too, and tried not to think too much on it. I had to work overtime that night and started heading home at around midnight. When I pulled up to my home, I saw Jake sitting on my doorstep. I really didn't want to get out of my car, but I did and walked up to him. He started off politely, asking if I had thought over his proposal. I said no, that I'm sorry, but I'm not interested. Once again, as if a switch had flipped, he went off on me, calling me spoiled and ungrateful. I was scared at this point and asked him to leave. He wouldn't. I managed to get to my car with him following me and showed him through the window that I'm calling the police. He swore at me and left. I didn't call the police that night. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, thinking he was just frustrated. One of my biggest regrets is not calling them. The next morning, I found wildflowers that looked like they were picked from a garden at my front door, as well as a post-it with the word, sorry, and a sad face drawn on it. At work that day, I was called by the nurse in charge who took me aside saying my boyfriend was here to see me, as it's urgent. She also told me to tell my boyfriend that he should not come to see me at work again, especially since I wasn't on break, as it's unprofessional. It was Jake. He wanted to ask me if I had gotten his flowers and message. I went off on him, saying things along the lines of how dare he come to my work, get me in trouble no less, pose as my boyfriend. All this took place in the canteen. He didn't say anything, didn't apologize. I told him to knock it off and I left. Things only got worse from there. He would often wait for me when I got home, try to bribe me with gifts, more flowers. He even went as far as to get me a new guitar. I accepted nothing and always left everything where he put them. I eventually broke down to my dad, who asked if I wanted him to speak to Jake. I said no. He offered for me to move back in with him, but I had too much pride and declined. My dad was really worried about me. One day, everything came to a halt when I came home to my front door ajar, though not broken. My front room looked absolutely ransacked. I ran to my car and called the police. Nothing was missing, absolutely nothing. But my front room, kitchen, and bedroom were all rummaged through. I told the police I had an inkling it was Jake, who they ended up questioning, but his friend vouched for him and said they were together that evening, so it couldn't have been Jake. I still don't believe that. I tried to tell the police everything that has been happening with Jake and how I was starting to feel very unsafe. However, I had no proof but the notes he had left me, which weren't threatening. So since there was no threat to life or well-being, they literally could not do anything. My dad helped me clean everything up, and I had my locks changed. Jake actually left me alone for a little while after that. I started looking for new places to live around that time. Then, one evening, I had come home, ate some food, showered, and went to bed, only to be awoken, I'm not sure when, to somebody standing in my doorway. I didn't move. I remember originally thinking I was having a sleep paralysis episode, but after moving my fingers, I realized I was fully awake, with a dark figure clearly standing in my doorway. My phone was under my pillow, so I rolled over to my side, pretending to still be asleep, and I just waited with my hand under my pillow on my phone. There was no way I could call the police without alerting the person in my doorway. Eventually, I could hear the footsteps fade, and I called the police, only telling them my address and that someone just broke into my home, and I think that they're still here. I got out of bed, grabbed the keys on my nightstand, and got out of the house by going out of the window and bolting it to my car. I had on a tank top and shorts. I didn't even have shoes on, which made driving horrible. I saw him then when I was pulling out, standing in the kitchen through the window. It was Jake. I had a small essential oil diffuser next to the window that shined enough light to be able to tell who the figure was. I drove as I spoke to the police. I remember just completely detaching from reality. At least, that's what it felt like. I drove to my dad's house. After looking over my house, the police drove to my dad's home where I was. I told them everything about Jake, how he's been following me, coming to my work, waiting for me when I got home, and now I was 100% sure he broke into my home and was planning to do God knows what. I was told that they found my front door locked when they got there and went to knock on Jake's door. He answered and looked as if he had just woken up. They asked him some questions and left him alone. It is so unimaginably hard to prove that you're being stalked in the UK. I managed to get a restraining order on the grounds of harassment, with proof that he had come to my workplace posing as my boyfriend, and a coworker who could support me in this, as she had overheard our conversation where I had asked him to stop following me. I had also saved some texts he sent me, where I asked how he got my number, and told him to stop contacting me. But he went on to send some vaguely threatening messages along the lines of, "I'll be waiting for you when you come home today," which, along with the workplace incident, as well as the fact that I had mentioned Jake to the police when my house was broken into, managed to give me my restraining order. I went back to that house once with my dad and his friend to gather out all of my things. I did not see Jake that time, or ever again for that matter. I had to transfer workplaces, back to my original workplace as I moved back in with my dad. I'm now moved away and live alone again, trying to put the past behind me. But this type of thing definitely messed with me a little. I had to get some therapy and found it difficult to develop friendships, especially romantic relationships. He somewhat ruined that for me. I've not made any new friends since. Never had a boyfriend either. I find it very hard to trust people outside of work colleagues and family. Where do I even begin? I guess this all started a little while after our move to Maple Street. My wife and I had finally managed to save enough money for a down payment on a small house in Hampstead, our beloved little hometown. We had lived in our quaint new bungalow for a couple days and were still unpacking our things when we got a knock at the front door. Opening it up, we saw a couple standing there holding a casserole dish. They smiled at us warmly and told us they lived next door and were welcoming us to the neighborhood on behalf of everyone. "Wow, that's so nice of you," I said to them, taking the dish they offered us. "I'm Jordan, and this is my wife Christine." They introduced themselves as Sarah and Greg, a married couple from next door. We spoke for a few minutes, but they didn't seem to want to overstay their welcome. Shortly after arriving, they said they would be on their way. "Let us know if you need anything at all," said Greg. "I mean that. If you need to borrow a cup of sugar, whatever, we're happy to help out." "Thanks. That's really generous of you." Hey, that's what neighbors are for, right? Not 2 weeks passed before I took them up on their offer. It's not like I was trying to take advantage of them or anything, but I was putting together a new table and couldn't find my tools anywhere. It seemed like they had been lost during the move. I just needed a screwdriver, so I went over to Greg and Sarah's place and knocked on the door. Greg answered and said he would be happy to let me borrow a Phillips head. He invited me into his garage while he went to look for it. He opened the garage door and I went in to join him. Upon entering, I realized that Greg was a compulsive neat freak. He had labeled drawers and cabinets for everything, and I was amazed to see an assortment of hammers, axes, and saws hanging from the wall, sorted by size and type of tool. Everything was clean and looked brand new. His table had no hint of sawdust or a speck of dirt upon it. The blade gleamed like it had been freshly polished, though I could have sworn I had heard him using it just the day prior. "Wow, you're really organized." "Well, I'm an engineer, and I've been told we're an odd breed. I like to keep everything tidy, and I like to have a place for everything. Sarah thinks I'm a bit OCD. Man, this is really something else. I'll need to buy some new tools now, I guess. Unless we manage to find mine when we get everything unpacked. Well, I'd recommend Ted's Hardware Store over on Main and 5th. They have a good selection, and their prices are pretty decent. I like to support the local businesses rather than the big chain stores or online places. so I've been shopping there for years. He went over to a tool chest and pulled out a screwdriver. Here you go. Just bring it back when you get a chance, he said, handing it to me. Thanks. Much appreciated. After walking away, I realized we still hadn't returned their casserole dish. 3 weeks later, I saw the screwdriver sitting on my workbench. I cringed and realized then that we still had their casserole dish as well. At least he didn't seem to be taking it personally. I had seen him just that morning, and he had smiled and waved, acting friendly. I decided to go over to his place and bring the items back to him. When I got there, though, nobody was home. I felt awkward just leaving the items on the porch or putting the screwdriver in the mailbox, especially after accidentally keeping it for weeks longer than intended. So, instead, I just took them back home and told myself I would bring them back on the weekend. Of course, I forgot to do that once again. We were busy running errands and the screwdriver slipped my mind for a while once again. I didn't realize that Greg was upset at all, until I woke up in this dark, narrow wooden box. The same box he'd been in his garage working on for days. He had his garage door open yesterday while sanding it, and I'd asked him about it. It looked like a wooden coffin, except it was smooth and had no gaps in the wood. The thing looked sturdy, and the wood was thick and strong. For a little experiment I'm working on, he told me with a grin. I'll show you when it's finished. I was trapped inside here when I woke up, feeling claustrophobic immediately in the small enclosed space. I still had my phone, but noticed that all functions on it were disabled, except for a couple of apps like this one. My breath caught like a dry lump in my throat as panic gripped every part of my body. Pure terror like I had never felt before began to consume me. I closed my eyes and opened them again, trying to convince myself I was having a nightmare. I wasn't. I could smell the fresh sawdust of the box I was trapped in, but beneath that was the aroma of wet earth all around me. Alarm bells began to ring in my mind, and I tried to convince myself that it wasn't possible. I didn't want to accept the fact that I had been buried alive. My head was still spinning from whatever drugs I had been unwittingly injected with. My arm ached with a dull soreness as well, as if someone had stuck me with a large needle there. Pounding on the wood above me, I found it to be unyielding and sturdy. There was no hint of weakness across any part of it. Feeling groggy and sick, I turned on the flashlight on my phone to examine the lid of the coffin which I was trapped inside of. Phillips head screws were sealing it shut from the inside. Hundreds and hundreds of them. They lined the edges, spaced barely a quarter inch apart from each other. They spelled out a message on the inside of the lid as well. I used the flashlight on my phone to read the words left for me on the lid of the wooden coffin I was trapped in. The message from Greg read as follows. Dear Jordan, you should have returned my screwdriver. I didn't care about the casserole dish, but that was my favorite screwdriver. I needed it the other day, and it wasn't where it was supposed to be. Everything needs to be where it is supposed to be. You ruined it. You ruined everything. The voices told me where you're supposed to be. Underground, in the box they said to make for you. Bet you wish you had that Phillips head screwdriver right now, don't you? Greg. I don't know how I'm going to get out of here. I don't even know where I am, or if anyone knows I'm gone. But the air in this sealed wooden coffin won't last forever. I know that much. If you're out there, Greg, I'm sorry. You can have your screwdriver back. Just please let me out of here. I'm begging you. I'll be a better neighbor, I swear. I'll be the best neighbor you've ever had. I won't tell anyone you tried to kill me. Please. Please let me out of here. You can borrow my shovel if you need to. Please. Borrow my shovel.
When I was 14, I would spend the summer holidays away from school at home. In the small village I lived in, this meant I mainly spent my days on my own, just watching TV and playing The Sims. My parents were generally out of the house from 8 AM until 5 PM. I was raised to never answer the door to strangers. However, my favourite spot in the living room was right next to the window, so I could always see people on the street, and in turn, they could see me. One day, I was sat watching daytime TV when I noticed a man walking down our street. As our street has a dead end, I normally recognize everyone who walks down it, but I'd certainly never seen this guy before. He was tall, thin, and unshaven. He was wearing a hooded jumper, with the hood up and his sleeves rolled up as well, revealing tattoos on his arms. He was carrying a large duffel bag, and was looking closely at each house he passed. As I was sat there watching him, I was clearly in full view. He started to pass our house, and when he saw me, he smiled and started walking up our short drive. He came up to our front door and knocked. I knew I shouldn't answer, but he had seen me, and at 14 I was afraid of being rude to an adult, so I obediently went and opened the door a crack. I peeked around the door and said hello. As he spoke, he pulled the duffel bag around to the front of his body and asked me if my parents were home. At this point, I figured he'd probably leave if I said no, but instead, he stepped forward towards the door and unzipped the bag. Well, the thing is, I just got out of prison. I want to do the right thing, you know? It's so hard to find a job, so I'm trying to sell some things. He started pulling towels, handkerchiefs, and other junk out of his bag. The word prison made my heart skip a beat, and I quickly mumbled something about having no money, and I closed the door on him. He stood outside my door for a minute, still talking to me about being able to help. So I went upstairs and waited for him to leave, which he eventually did. I soon settled back down to watching the TV and forgot all about the encounter. At 5 PM, my parents came home and they took the TV, so I went up to my room. A little while later, there was a knock at the door. I came onto the landing and peered down as my mum answered. 2 police officers were stood there on the step. They asked if anyone had come by that day. My mum said no one had, and that's when I remembered my visitor from earlier. I came down the stairs and said that actually someone had called by. Seeing as I was young, the 2 police officers asked to come inside and talk to me. They asked me to describe the man and the conversation I had with him. They seemed really worried and kept telling me not to worry and to be honest about what happened. Once I'd told them everything, they asked to speak to my parents on their own, and then they thanked me and left. I was straight on at my parents, asking them what was going on. My mum explained that a few minutes after the guy had come to our house, he had gone to another girl's house. She was in the shower and hadn't answered the door when he knocked. Apparently, he let himself into the house and walked upstairs. When he found her in the shower, he sexually assaulted her. With my description and the evidence from the girl, they tracked the guy down. It turned out he had just been released from prison for a similar attack on another girl. I never answer the door when I'm alone now, and I refuse to shower when I'm home alone.